I'm Christina, 25 years old, and I mostly keep to myself. Even though I have a job or study, my family might think I don't because I don't talk about it much, especially my brother. How did I end up like this? Well, it all goes back to my time in middle school when I started feeling like I couldn't trust people. It's not just one thing that caused it, but mostly because I felt ignored. I guess people didn't find me interesting because I was always into machines. I've always enjoyed messing around with computers, and I was pretty good at it, which helped out at home. But then my school grades dropped because I spent more time with computers than with friends, and my parents got worried. When I finished elementary school, my parents started telling me off, saying, "Stop spending so much time with those machines." During middle school, as my parents kept scolding me, I started feeling like I shouldn't pursue my interests. So whenever I had free time from school, I'd hide in my room to avoid my parents, cutting off contact with the outside world. This made more people think I was strange or risky, and I started feeling isolated even at school. The only person who supported me was my brother Keith. He always knew how to cheer me up and keep me going. With his help, I finished school. But I didn't go to high school. Instead, I did computer jobs from home. When I was about 16, I got a part-time job, and with the money I earned, I bought old computers to take apart and rebuild from scratch, just the way I liked. My hobby became a business opportunity, and by the time I hit 20, I was making and selling computers. Soon, I started my own business, offering affordable computers, and became quite well known. By the time I turned 25, I'd made a decent amount of money. I even started contributing $2,500 to my parents' household each month and still had money left over. Even though I tried explaining my job to my parents, they didn't get it. After a few arguments, they decided that as long as I could support myself, they didn't mind what I did. This meant they stopped interfering and I could live as I pleased at home. But my brother still didn't think much of me. My brother used to be my ally, the one who understood me best when I was in school. He was really kind. But maybe he got tired of his sister, who was still at her parents' house tinkering with machines even after turning 20. Over time, he started treating me harshly whenever he saw me. Since I didn't keep quiet about it, we ended up having more conflicts, and now we're not on good terms. Things got even worse after my brother got married. His wife, who we'd known since high school, never really liked me. After hearing about me from my brother, she didn't want to be my sister-in-law and seemed to influence my brother against me. Because of this ongoing situation, I became known as the troublemaker at home. Even though I stayed in my room most of the time, I felt my heart breaking from all the hostility directed at me, which was different from my parents' concerned words. Suddenly, my parents' home, once a cozy sanctuary despite the criticisms, turned into a hostile environment. I no longer felt comfortable there, and it seemed like my parents were being swayed against me while my allies disappeared. Even though I had my own income and contributed to the household expenses, my brother and sister-in-law, who didn't understand my work, saw me as a burden. They started talking about kicking me out and taking over the house. Feeling disconnected from my brother and his plans, I figured leaving wouldn't make much of a difference. Once I found a new place, I wouldn't have to contribute to household expenses anymore, which meant I could save that money instead. It was kind of a silver lining. As I was thinking about moving out, my brother brought up the topic of inheritance out of the blue. He seemed to think that our parents' financial comfort, despite my lack of a traditional job, was due to their wealth. So when the idea of me leaving came up, he suggested, "Since we'll be taking care of Mom and Dad, we should inherit their assets. You should give up your share of the inheritance." But the truth was, the reason our parents could enjoy their lives without working was because I was covering their living expenses. I didn't think they could manage without that money, but my brother saw me as nothing but a burden in my room. Despite feeling like leaving was the best option, I decided to ask one more time out of kindness. "Are you really okay with me leaving?" I asked. My brother just laughed and said, "We'd be happy if you left already." It became clear once again how little he understood. I felt sorry for him and his wife, which made me even more determined to leave. A few days later, I was still in my room, and my brother and sister-in-law were relentless in their efforts to get me out. They kept knocking on my door, convinced Mom to stop cooking for me, and even told me to do my own laundry. But these were all things I'd have to do if I lived alone anyway. I wasn't going to just sit back and let them take my place away from me without a fight. Sure, I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't about to accept it either. I was being unfairly pushed out, and I wasn't going to take it lying down. After all, I'm skilled with machines, something my brother seemed to forget. He didn't realize the power I had with a computer at my disposal. I wasn't the type to quietly obey orders and leave. My brother's marriage, with me as the reclusive sister, was the only chance for our parents to have a grandchild. They were so focused on that, they didn't see how wrong it was for me to leave. So I decided to set up a little surprise for them, a trap that would spring into action as soon as I left the house. After finding a new place to live and completing all the necessary procedures, I was ready to leave my family home. Just before I departed, I left a farewell message for my parents and brother. I've been supporting the family, and you've forgotten all the good I've done. I hope you realize who the real burden on our family wealth is. My parents seemed surprised for a moment, but they probably trusted that my brother would figure things out somehow. They all brushed off my words as bitterness. I knew they didn't take me seriously. But for now, I believed it was best to leave things this way. So I left the house. I took a significant amount of equipment from my family home and bought additional items, along with necessary furniture and appliances for my new place. I set up my new place just the way I wanted it, decorating it with my favorite style and creating a cozy atmosphere. It turned out to be a perfect environment for me to work in, and surprisingly, living alone wasn't as intimidating as I thought it would be. In fact, I wished I had made the move sooner. The people in the neighborhood were friendly and life was comfortable. Since leaving my family home and taking care of everything on my own, I've been enjoying myself, trying out new experiences. While I was reveling in my newfound independence, I wondered how things were going back at my family home, especially since they lost my financial support. Then, out of the blue, my mother called. "Hey, Christina, did you do something to our machines?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied. "There's something wrong with the computers and electronics," she said. "I have no idea about that," I said, puzzled. "I used to help out for free because we're family, but since you treated me poorly and kicked me out, even though you're my parents, you'll have to pay the regular price," I explained. "What? That's pretty greedy. We're your parents. Can't you give us a discount?" they responded. "Well, I prefer giving discounts to my friends. Unlike you, they treat me well," I countered. "Fine, you're so cheap," they grumbled. Internally, I sighed with relief that another trap hadn't been triggered and dealt with the situation calmly. But my mother didn't seem to appreciate my response. She abruptly hung up, behaving like a sulking child, and even sent a spiteful email implying that mean people lose friends. It made me question who was acting like the mature one. Frankly, it seemed self-centered, if not downright selfish. As for what I did to the family computer, I simply restored all the adjustments I had previously made for free back to their original settings. To someone unfamiliar, it might seem like the computer malfunctioned on its own. When I suggested they contact the company for repairs as an individual, they got upset. But I expected as much, so I let it go. 6 months after leaving home and settling into my new life, my father called me. "I hate to ask, but can you lend me some money?" he said. "What do you mean? Lend you money?" I responded. "Your brother and his wife have been spending recklessly. They think we're rich, and they keep complaining, asking for money to buy this or go there," he explained. "I have no idea about any of this. Why do you always come to me with everything? I've heard of daughters who live alone sending money home, but parents asking their children for money? Shouldn't it be the other way around, out of generosity?" I questioned. "It's not that simple," he replied. "Well, even $500 would help," he added. "I'm not giving you anything. I won't lend you money either. I have no intention of financially supporting you anymore," I firmly stated. "Of course, I'll work on your machines if you pay for my services," I replied calmly. "You've really become stingy," they retorted. "I guess Mom was right about you." They went on complaining about my unemployed years, but I didn't let it bother me. I just ended the call. My father didn't send any emails, but he started calling me multiple times a day, which I found annoying. What troublesome parents I have, I thought to myself. A few days later, my brother, sounding desperate, called me. When I asked why they kept contacting me, he asked, "Do you know why our family was wealthy?" It seemed like he suspected their financial situation had worsened since I moved out. But it was too late. My current home was my sanctuary. My work and life were all centered around this house, and I had no intention of leaving it again. Could it be that our family's wealth came from the $2,500 I was contributing each month? I pondered. I didn't have to give that much, but I felt grateful for my upbringing, so I willingly contributed more. But now, why would I continue supporting a home that kicked me out? It didn't make sense, right? So that's when Mom and Dad's finances took a hit. My brother realized. I'm sorry, but even if you asked me to come back, I have no intention of doing so, I replied firmly. I understand now that what happened was wrong. I'm sorry, but it's too late for apologies. I have no plans to have any involvement with you in the future. Please don't call me anymore. Hey, wait, my brother protested, but I ended the call. When I left home, I made a vow never to be drawn back into their drama. Forgiving them wasn't something I could do easily. I decided to cancel my cell phone contract to avoid the constant calls. 5 years have passed since then, and I've moved on. I got married and started a new chapter in my life. My partner is in the same line of work as me, so he understands my lifestyle and helps out with household chores. Although I thought about reaching out to my parents since they're technically family, I felt it was too late. I hadn't made any attempts to reconnect. However, my husband expressed an interest in meeting my parents and learning about their current situation. To gain insight, I hired a detective to investigate. What we discovered was shocking. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle and keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home, had accrued a mountain of debt from various lenders. With no hope of repayment, the debt continued to grow with accumulating interest, leaving them in a dire situation. The debt from my parents alone exceeded $100,000, and their house had been used as collateral. Now, where our family home once stood, there's only an empty lot. Although I felt a twinge of sadness due to my sentimental attachment to our family home, I couldn't help but think that my parents were facing the consequences of their actions. I decided to look into my brother's current situation. It appeared that my brother had suggested a divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending habits, but she vehemently opposed the idea. They were now embroiled in a drawn-out divorce lawsuit, which was draining both their time and finances. His wife had hired a lawyer and was resisting the divorce, refusing to let go of my brother, leaving them at an impasse. Despite rumors, my brother and his wife hadn't yet had children. To confirm, I sent the detective to the hospital where they were being treated. It turned out my brother was indeed infertile, nearly incapable of producing sperm, making natural conception highly unlikely. My parents, who had pinned their hopes on having grandchildren from my brother and his wife, were disappointed and ended their cohabitation. The family home had to be sold to settle the debt, marking the sad state of my family. This distressing reality became apparent after a cursory investigation. It was evident that engaging with them in this condition wouldn't be beneficial for me or my husband. Now, I have a loving husband, 4 children, and a dog. We've purchased a spacious home and are living the life my family once dreamed of. If they were aware of our situation, they might try to exploit it, which I couldn't bear. As soon as I learned about this, I went to the local office and arranged for my personal information to be accessible only through formal disclosure requests. I made a conscious effort to keep my distance from them and asked my husband not to engage with them regarding our marriage. Although he seemed disappointed at first, after explaining the situation, he understood and hasn't brought it up since. I hope that once things settle down at my family home and a time for reconciliation arrives, I can rebuild a relationship with my parents and brother.
My name is Rachel, and this is my story. Growing up, my life was all about church, family, and the simple truths my parents held dear. My dad, Thomas, was a deacon, and my mom, Mary, led the women's group. I always tried to be the good daughter they wanted. I wore modest dresses, sang in the choir, and never missed a Sunday service. But life at home wasn't just prayers and Bible study. It was also filled with the constant tug-of-war between my parents and my older brother, David. David was different. He had this fire in him, a passion for music that didn't fit into our parents' world. I remember him as a kid, always tapping rhythms on the kitchen table, eyes alive with dreams bigger than our small town. Then came his teenage years, and with it, the electric guitar. He was a natural, and soon he formed a band. They called themselves Rebels Echo. It was like a declaration of his new life, away from the expectations of our parents. Our parents didn't understand. They saw his music as a path away from faith. "He's lost," they'd say with a sigh. I'd sit there, listening, feeling torn between loyalty to my family and the love for my brother. Despite their disapproval, David and I stayed close. We'd talk on the phone late at night, him sharing stories of his gigs, me whispering about life at home. He was my window to a world beyond our small town, a world I yearned to explore, but never dared to. Then came Michael, my husband, or as I thought back then, the love of my life. He was older, a friend of a friend from church. Michael was everything my parents admired, kind, successful, and deeply religious. We dated briefly, and before I knew it, there was a ring on my finger and a promise of forever. Our wedding was beautiful but bittersweet. David wasn't there. Mom and Dad insisted, and I, as always, didn't argue. Michael held my hand, his smile warm, but my heart ached for my brother. As we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel a part of my world was missing. After the wedding, we moved into Michael's house. It was a cozy place, filled with the promise of a happy future. But as I unpacked my things, I couldn't shake off the feeling of something missing. I remember Michael noticing my distant look. "Everything okay, Rachel?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Yeah, just thinking about David," I replied, forcing a smile. "He's made his choices, Rachel. We need to focus on our life, our future," he said, a hint of firmness in his voice. I nodded, knowing he was right. But deep down, I couldn't let go of the bond I shared with my brother, no matter how far our paths had diverged. The first few months of marriage felt like a dream. Michael was attentive and caring, always making sure I was happy. Our days were filled with shared laughter and long talks into the night. He'd often surprise me with small gifts or a bouquet of flowers, just because. "Morning, beautiful." He'd greet me every day with a kiss, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Good morning," I'd reply, my heart fluttering with happiness. We'd spend weekends exploring nearby towns, trying out little diners, and walking hand in hand by the riverside. Everything felt perfect, like a life I had only imagined in my dreams. But as time passed, I began to feel a bit restless. I loved being with Michael, but there was a part of me that wanted more than just being a housewife. Back in college, I had dreams of becoming a teacher. I missed learning, being around people, and feeling like I was contributing to something. One evening, while Michael was reading in the living room, I gathered the courage to bring it up. "Michael, can we talk about something?" I asked, sitting next to him. "Of course, what's on your mind?" he replied, putting his book down. "I've been thinking, maybe I could look for a job, or at least some volunteer work. I want to do something more with my time," I said hesitantly. He looked at me, surprised. "But Rachel, you don't need to work. I'm here to take care of everything. Isn't this what you always wanted?" I paused, not wanting to upset him. "I know, and I appreciate that, but I need something of my own, you know? Something that makes me feel fulfilled." Michael sighed, taking my hand. "I just want you to be happy, Rachel. But think about our future, our plans for a family. Don't you think your place is here with me, building that future?" I understood his point, but it didn't sit right with me. Still, I didn't want to argue. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it," I said, forcing a smile. As days turned into weeks, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I focused on being the best wife I could be, cooking meals, keeping the house tidy, and supporting Michael. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself, the part that yearned for independence and a sense of purpose outside our home. Despite these creeping doubts, our life together seemed good on the surface. We were the ideal couple in everyone's eyes. But as the months rolled by, changes in our home became more noticeable. Michael, once so attentive and present, started coming home late, often missing dinner. At first, he would apologize, citing work pressure and important projects. "Sorry, Rachel, work's a nightmare right now. I hope you understand," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. I tried to be understanding. "It's okay, Michael. Work is important. Just don't overdo it, okay?" But deep down, I felt lonely and neglected. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt empty and quiet. I found myself often sitting by the window, waiting for him to come home. One evening, when Michael came home later than usual, I decided to address the growing distance between us. "Michael, we need to talk," I started as he walked through the door. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes. "What is it now, Rachel?" I hesitated, taken aback by his tone. "It's just, you've been coming home late a lot. I miss spending time with you." He sighed, dropping his keys on the table. "Rachel, I'm working hard for us, for our future. You should be grateful, not complaining." I felt a sting at his words. "I am grateful, but I also miss my husband. Is it wrong to want to spend time together?" Michael's face hardened. "Look, I'm doing my best here. Maybe you should find some hobbies or something to keep you busy." His words hurt, but I swallowed the pain. "Maybe you're right," I murmured, even though it felt wrong. The conversations became less frequent after that. Michael grew more distant, and I felt more isolated. I started questioning everything: our marriage, my role as a wife, and my own happiness. It felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One day, I was cleaning the house and found a receipt for a restaurant in Michael's coat pocket. It was dated for a night he said he'd been working late. My heart sank. Confronting him seemed daunting, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I brought it up. "Michael, I found a receipt in your coat. It was for the night you said you were working late," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "So? I grabbed a bite after work. What's the big deal?" "It's not that. It's just, you never mentioned it. Are you sure there's nothing else I should know?" I asked, hoping for honesty. Michael's response was quick and sharp. "Rachel, you're being paranoid. I'm tired of this constant questioning. Can't a man have some peace in his own home?" I recoiled at his words, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Was I wrong to question him? But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me. Feeling the growing distance in our marriage, I knew I needed something to fill the void. The idea of getting a job or doing something meaningful was still on my mind. It was a scary thought, going against Michael's wishes, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I needed this for myself. One morning, after Michael left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I started looking for job openings. There were a few that caught my eye, but one in particular stood out: a teaching assistant position at a local community center. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hesitated for a moment before applying. My heart was racing. This was it, my first real step towards something of my own. When I hit the submit button, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. A few days later, I got a call. They wanted to interview me. I was over the moon, but also nervous about how Michael would react. I decided to keep it to myself until I knew more. The interview went well, and they offered me the position. I was ecstatic. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. But the thought of telling Michael dampened my excitement. That evening, when Michael came home, I gathered all my courage. "Michael, I have something to tell you," I started, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his expression tired. "What is it now, Rachel?" I got a job as a teaching assistant. It's just part-time," I said quickly, almost in a whisper. Michael's reaction was not what I expected. He just stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "Do what you want, Rachel. I don't have the energy to argue about this." I was taken aback by his indifference. Part of me had hoped he would see this as a positive step, but it seemed he didn't care. Despite his reaction, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The job was rewarding, and I loved interacting with the children and other staff. It was a breath of fresh air, a break from the loneliness and tension at home. With each day at the community center, I felt more confident and independent. It was a small job, but it meant the world to me. It gave me something to look forward to, something that was just mine. But at home, things with Michael were deteriorating. He was home even less, and when he was, we barely spoke. The once warm and loving man I married was now just a stranger passing by in the hallway. The day of our wedding anniversary was bittersweet. The house buzzed with preparations, yet Michael was nowhere to be seen, supposedly tied up with work. My parents fluttered around, trying to make everything perfect, their efforts casting a shadow over the hollow feeling in my heart. Then, in the midst of the controlled chaos, David arrived, his presence like a burst of fresh air. He strode in, carrying not just his charismatic aura, but also his laptop, brimming with stories from his life on the road. "David, what are you doing here?" My mother's voice was sharp, laced with disapproval. "I couldn't miss Rachel's big day, could I?" David replied, his tone light yet defiant. Ignoring the tension, David turned to me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Got something to show you, sis. You won't believe the parties and the people I've met." We sat down in a quiet corner, and he flipped open his laptop. As he scrolled through photos of crowded stages, vibrant parties, and smiling faces, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. These were glimpses into a world so different from mine. Then, in a casual swipe, everything changed. There he was, Michael. In the midst of a raucous party, with a woman clinging to his arm, laughing, carefree, and so very unlike the man I knew. "Wait, who's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to Michael in the photo. David glanced at the screen, nonchalant. "Oh, him! That's just some guy who's been hanging out with us a lot. Real ladies' man, changes girls like he changes guitar strings. Says he's got a boring and stupid wife at home." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Boring. Stupid. Was that how Michael saw me? Before I could process it all, the front door swung open. Michael walked in. His usual mask of composure shattered the moment he saw David. "David, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael's voice was laced with a panic. David looked up, surprise and realization dawning on his face. "Wait a minute. You're the husband? This is your Mike?" The room fell silent. My parents, unaware of the storm brewing, looked on in confusion. Michael's eyes darted between me and David, the color draining from his face. I held up the laptop, the image of him at the party glaring back at us. "Is this what you do on your late nights at work, Michael? Is this who you really are?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. The room spun around me. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in. Betrayal, lies, the facade of our perfect marriage. It all crumbled down in that moment. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a silent pillar of support. My parents were still trying to grasp the situation, their expressions shifting from shock to disappointment. The silence in the room was deafening after David's revelation. I stood there, holding the photo, feeling like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. My parents were staring at Michael, waiting for an explanation. Michael's eyes were fixed on the floor. "Michael, is this true?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and regret. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain this?" I said, my voice rising as I waved the photo. "It was just a mistake, Rachel. It meant nothing. I was just confused," Michael stammered. "A mistake? Confused? For how long have you been lying to me?" My voice was shaking with anger and hurt. "Rachel, please, let's talk about this privately," he pleaded, glancing nervously at my parents and David. "No, Michael, I deserve to know the truth. Here and now," I insisted. My mom stepped forward, her face filled with concern. "Rachel, maybe you two should—" "No, Mom, I need answers," I interrupted, my gaze still fixed on Michael. David was quiet, his expression somber. He put a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. Michael took a deep breath. "It started a few months ago. I was feeling overwhelmed, and she was there. It was a stupid mistake. I love you, Rachel." His words felt like a slap in the face. Love? How could he call this love? "I can't believe this. All those late nights, the times you weren't here." "It was all a lie," I said, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "But you did, Michael. You broke our vows. You broke my trust," I replied, tears streaming down my face. My dad spoke up, his voice stern. "You need to leave, Michael. Now." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my heart. The room was quiet again. My mom came over and hugged me, her embrace warm but unable to comfort the ache in my heart. David stood beside me, his presence a reminder of the family that still stood with me. I felt broken, the illusions of my perfect marriage shattered into a million pieces. But amidst the pain, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of clarity. The truth was out, and now I had to find a way to pick up the pieces and rebuild my life, a life that was mine and mine alone. The days following the revelation were a blur. My parents tried to comfort me, but their words felt distant. David stayed by my side, a silent guardian, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I knew what I had to do. The decision was clear, even through the fog of my pain. I needed to end my marriage with Michael. It wasn't just about his betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. Sitting at the kitchen table, David broke the silence. "You okay, sis?" I looked up, my eyes tired. "I will be. I need to start the divorce process. I can't stay in this marriage." David nodded. "I'm here for you, whatever you need." Meetings with lawyers were emotionally draining. I sat across from Michael at our final meeting, his face filled with remorse. "Rachel, I am so sorry. I never wanted things to end this way," he said, his voice low. "I know, but sorry isn't enough, Michael. You broke our trust, and I need to move on," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He nodded, looking defeated. "I just wish I could make things right." "Some things can't be undone," I said, signing the last of the papers. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I was free from the lies, the deceit. But with that freedom came the realization of my new reality. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life. The following weeks were a time of self-reflection. I spent hours talking with David, who shared his own stories of heartbreak and healing. My parents, though still struggling with their own feelings about the divorce, offered their support. One evening, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, Mom spoke up. "Rachel, we're here for you. You're strong, and you'll get through this." Dad nodded in agreement. "You've always been our rock, even when we didn't see it. We're proud of you." Their words, simple and sincere, touched me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I also threw myself into my work at the community center. The children's laughter and innocence were a balm to my wounded heart. I found joy in small moments, a smile from a child, a successful lesson, a thank you from a parent. In the midst of the fallout, I discovered a resilience within me that I didn't know existed. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt overwhelmed by loneliness and doubt. But I kept moving forward, driven by a newfound determination to live a life that was true to myself. Sitting in the small corner cafe, I cradled a warm cup of coffee, my mind drifting back through the whirlwind of recent events. The steam from the coffee blurred with my thoughts, each memory unfolding like a scene from a distant play. I remembered the day in court, the final decree of our divorce. Michael had sat there, a shadow of the man I once knew. He looked pathetic, his eyes void of the confidence he once carried. It was a stark contrast to the man I married, a sight that stirred a mix of pity and relief in me. Then came the tedious, bitter process of dividing our assets. Michael, who once professed undying love, was now coldly squabbling over every cent. It was a tedious and painful process, stripping away any lingering sentiments I had for the marriage we shared. Perhaps the most vivid memory was the last time I saw Michael. He had come to my doorstep, unannounced, his eyes red and swollen. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading for a second chance. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing but contempt. The tears, the pleas, they meant nothing. They were just the last desperate acts of a man who had lost everything through his own doing. Through all these moments, David was my pillar of strength. He was there in the courtroom, offering silent support with his presence. And on that final encounter with Michael, David stood by my side, a protective force against the man who had broken my trust. As I sat in the cafe, the noise of the bustling city around me, I realized how much I had changed. The naive girl who entered that marriage was gone. replaced by a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. I felt a sense of pride in my newfound independence and resilience. My gaze shifted to the busy street outside the cafe window. People were going about their lives, each absorbed in their own stories. I felt a kinship with them, a shared understanding of the struggles and triumphs life brings. I took a sip of my coffee, its warmth spreading through me. I was starting over, but this time on my own terms. There was a future out there waiting for me, filled with possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready to embrace it, with my past as a lesson and my brother's support as my strength. My name is Karen. 4 years ago, I stepped into a life I thought was perfect. Married at 27 to Michael, a man who promised to carry me in his arms before we even walked down the aisle, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. He wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend, my confidant. We shared everything, from morning coffees to late-night dreams about our future. Michael always had a way of making me feel special. I remember our first anniversary. He recreated our first date, down to the same table at the quaint Italian restaurant where we first realized we were meant for each other. It wasn't just about the grand gestures, it was the little things. The way he'd brush the hair from my face, the soft kisses he'd plant on my forehead when he thought I was asleep. Our life together was bliss, filled with laughter and love. We lived in a beautiful house, spacious and filled with light. It was our haven, a place where we planned to raise a family. My job as a fitness trainer at a popular gym brought me joy and fulfillment, and Michael was thriving in his career. We were doing well financially, and we often talked about starting a family, about having kids running around the house, filling it with even more laughter and joy. Evelyn, Michael's mother, was a strong presence in our lives. From the first time I met her, she showered me with compliments. "You're absolutely stunning, Karen, just like a Hollywood actress from the 50s, she'd said, her eyes sparkling with genuine fondness. She often spoke about how beautiful our children would be, combining my looks with Michael's charm. Her approval meant the world to me. But then, one ordinary evening, everything changed. I was driving home from the gym, my mind buzzing with plans for the weekend. Michael and I had planned a small getaway, just the two of us, a chance to reconnect and talk more about our future, about finally starting that family we'd always wanted. As I approached the intersection, a song we both loved started playing on the radio. I smiled, turning up the volume, lost in the moment. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a car ran the red light and slammed into my side. The impact was deafening, a cacophony of crunching metal and shattering glass. My head whipped to the side, and pain erupted across my face and body. The world spun wildly, a blur of lights and sounds, and then, as quickly as it had all started, everything plunged into silence and darkness. Waking up in the hospital was like emerging into a world I no longer recognized. My body was a patchwork of aches and bandages. The first few days were a blur of doctors, painkillers, and Michael's face, etched with worry. Michael sat beside me, holding my hand. His voice was gentle, but his eyes couldn't hide his concern. "Hey, how are you feeling?" he asked. I tried to smile, but it hurt. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I joked weakly. He offered a strained smile, but said nothing. The nurses were kind, always checking in, offering comforting words. But their eyes, full of pity, told a story they didn't voice. I knew I was badly hurt, but the extent of it was hidden beneath the bandages that wrapped my face. As days turned into a week, Michael's visits grew shorter, his excuses more frequent. "Work's crazy right now," he'd say, or "Mom needs my help with something." I understood, or at least I tried to, but the silence and the solitude in the hospital room were suffocating. The day came to remove the bandages. I sat in front of a mirror, my heart racing. The nurse, a kind woman named Lisa, offered me an encouraging smile. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Slowly, she unwrapped the bandages, revealing my reflection bit by bit. The face staring back at me was a stranger's, scarred, distorted, a stark contrast to the woman I used to be. I couldn't hold back the tears. Lisa put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's still early days. "Healing takes time," she said softly. I barely heard her. My thoughts were consumed by fear. What would Michael think? What would everyone think? I was no longer the woman he married. Michael's next visit was the hardest. He walked in, his usual confident stride faltering as he saw my face. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "It's bad, isn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Michael paused, struggling to find the right words. It's not that bad. You're still you." But the way he said it, the way he couldn't quite look at me, spoke volumes. I lay there, feeling a chasm growing between us. The man who had promised to carry me through life seemed lost, unsure of how to bridge the gap that my scars had created. He came out of the hospital room, and I overheard him on the phone. His words, meant to be private, cut through me like a knife. "I don't know, Mom. She became ugly. It's hard to look at her," he said, and there was something like disgust in his voice. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. I felt betrayed, not by his words, but by the realization that his love had conditions I was no longer able to meet. I mourned for my lost beauty, for the love I thought was unconditional, and for the future that now seemed like a distant dream. Returning home was supposed to be a relief, a step towards normalcy. But as I crossed the threshold of the house that once symbolized love and warmth, I felt sick because of the suffocating atmosphere of hostility, hidden hints, and disgust. The first few days, Michael was quiet, almost tiptoeing around me. Our conversations were strained, filled with awkward silences. I tried to bridge the gap, to reach out to him, but it felt like talking to a wall. One evening, as I sat on the couch trying to read, Michael walked in. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "How was your day?" I asked, hoping to start some kind of conversation. He shrugged, keeping his eyes fixed on the TV. "It was okay. Busy." I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. "I was thinking, maybe this weekend we could go out, just to get some fresh air." Michael hesitated, then said, "I don't think it's a good idea. Maybe you should rest more." His words stung. It wasn't about resting. It was about not wanting to be seen with me. I turned my attention back to my book, but the words blurred through my tears. It wasn't just Michael. Evelyn's visits were even more difficult. She would come in, her face twisted in a poorly disguised grimace as she looked at me. Her words were polite, but her eyes were cold. One day, she sat across from me, her gaze wandering everywhere but my face. "It's such a shame what happened," she said, a tinge of something like disgust in her voice. I clenched my fists, trying to maintain my composure. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Evelyn sighed, tapping her fingers on the table. "Well, we must all move on, right? Life doesn't stop." Her words, meant to be comforting, felt more like an attempt to avoid a difficult conversation. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then came the night that broke me. I woke up to the sound of Michael's voice. He was on the phone, his words slurred. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to the door. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. She's a different person, a monster. I don't even recognize her," he slurred, his voice heavy with drink. I stood there, frozen, as his words echoed in my head. I was the same person, wasn't I? But to him, I was a stranger, a monster, someone he no longer loved or desired. I returned to bed, but sleep eluded me. The darkness of the room felt suffocating, a physical embodiment of the loneliness that had enveloped my life. Lying there, I realized that the home I once cherished no longer existed. It was just a house now, a place where I lived but no longer belonged. The changes in our home were like a slow, creeping fog, gradually obscuring the warmth and love that once filled it. Michael began coming home late, the smell of alcohol clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes, once so full of affection, now often glinted with irritation and something darker. One night, he staggered in, his steps unsteady. I sat up, concerned. "Michael, you're home late. Is everything okay?" He sneered, his words slurred. "Oh, now you care?" You spend all day hiding in this house, and now you pretend to care about me?" I flinched, stung by his words. "Michael, you're drunk. Let's talk about this in the morning." He laughed bitterly, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "What's there to talk about? Look at you. Look at us." I retreated to our room, tears stinging my eyes. The next day, I called Evelyn, hoping for some understanding, some support. "He's drinking a lot, coming home late, and he's mean," I told her, my voice breaking. Evelyn's response was curt, dismissive. "It's normal, dear. Men do these things. He's just stressed, that's all." Her words were like a cold splash of water. I realized then that I was alone in this, that my pain and my struggles were mine to bear. The worst night came without warning. I woke up to bright flashes of light. Blinking away sleep, I saw Michael standing over me with his phone, taking pictures. His face was twisted in a drunken smirk. "What are you doing?" I asked, confusion and fear mingling in my voice. He laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. "I'm sending your photos to Hollywood. Maybe you can star in horror films now, no makeup needed." His words cut through me like a knife. I lay there, frozen, as he continued to snap pictures, each click of the camera shutter a punctuation mark to my humiliation. After he left, I turned my face into the pillow, my body racked with sobs. The tears came in torrents, for the man I had lost, for the love that had turned to cruelty, and for the life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Humiliated by Michael's cruel remarks and feeling increasingly alienated, I started wearing a mask at home. It was a plain, white mask, hiding the scars that had become the focus of my existence. It was a small shield against the pain, a barrier between me and the world that had turned so cold. As I adjusted the mask one morning, looking at the blank face staring back at me in the mirror, my phone rang, cutting through the silence of the room. An unknown number flashed on the screen, and with a hesitant hand, I answered. "Hello, is this Mrs. Johnson?" The voice was unfamiliar, cautious yet sincere. "Yes, it's me. Who's this?" I replied, curiosity piqued. "My name is John. I was the father of the young man in your accident," he said, his voice laced with regret. A mix of emotions washed over me. "Oh, I see," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. John paused before continuing. "I can't express how sorry I am for what happened. My son was troubled, and what he did, it was unforgivable. I want to do something to help, to make amends." His words, unexpected and heavy with sorrow, left me momentarily speechless. "How can you help?" I asked, skepticism mingling with a faint spark of hope. "I'd like to meet and discuss it in person. Would that be okay?" John's request was earnest, almost pleading. After a moment of hesitation, I agreed to meet him. Sitting across from John in a cafe, his eyes filled with remorse, I listened as he spoke. "Karen, I want to offer financial support for any surgeries or treatments that might help you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The offer was both overwhelming and tempting. I need to think about it," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. I kept the meeting and the offer a secret from Michael and Evelyn. Their reactions, I feared, would only add to my confusion and pain. After days of internal debate, I decided to accept John's offer. I arranged consultations with plastic surgeons, discussing what could be done to help heal my scars. To Michael, I mentioned only that I was going for routine medical treatments. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't volunteer any, his indifference a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. On the day of the surgery, as I lay on the operating table, the mask was removed, and for a moment, I faced my scars unflinchingly. Closing my eyes, I allowed myself to dream, to hope for a future where the woman in the mirror would be someone I recognized, someone whole. Weeks turned into months since the surgery, and with each passing day, my face healed, slowly returning to what it once was. But I kept this transformation hidden under my mask, a secret held close to my chest. Michael, lost in his own world, didn't seem to notice or care. The day I returned home from my final follow-up appointment, the mask firmly in place, I braced myself. Michael and Evelyn were there, their expressions clouded with disdain as I walked in. The air was thick with unspoken contempt, a familiar yet unwelcome presence in what used to be our home. Michael's eyes met mine briefly before he looked away, his lips curling into a sneer. "Look at you, hiding behind that mask. Can't even face the world," he muttered. I remained silent, the mask my armor against his words. Without warning, he thrust a stack of papers towards me. They fluttered to the ground, divorce papers, a stark symbol of our failed marriage. "I'm done with this farce," he spat out. "Sign these and let's end it." I felt a cold calm settle over me. Picking up the papers, I signed them without a word, my pen steady, my resolve firmer than ever. Evelyn, standing nearby, scoffed. "Good riddance. We don't need an ugly reminder of your failure in our lives." Her words, meant to wound, barely grazed me. I had grown beyond their reach. With a small smile playing on my lips, I reached up and removed my mask, revealing my face, almost as it was before the accident. The shock on Michael's and Evelyn's faces was a picture I'd remember forever. Michael's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, her earlier poise crumbling. But how?" Michael stammered, taking a step towards me. I looked at him, my smile growing. "You were too busy wallowing in your own misery to notice me, to see the person you vowed to love in sickness and in health." Michael's face crumbled, his earlier bravado fading. "Please, let's start over. We can forget all this happened." I laughed, not out of joy, but because of the absurdity of his words. "Forget? No, Michael. I won't forget how you treated me, how you made me feel. I'm leaving, but not because you or your mother want me to. I'm leaving for me." I gathered my bag, my signed divorce papers in hand, and walked past them, out of the house that was no longer a home. Their shocked faces were the last image I took with me, a reminder of how far I had come and the new life that awaited me. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I moved into a small apartment, a space that was mine alone. It was here, among unpacked boxes and bare walls, that I began to rebuild my life. Returning to work at the fitness center was a big step. The familiar smell of the gym, the sound of weights clinking. It was comforting. My colleagues welcomed me back with open arms, their smiles genuine and warm. "Hey, Karen, you're back. We missed you around here," said Lisa, one of the trainers. I smiled, feeling a sense of belonging. It's good to be back. I've missed this place. As I resumed training sessions, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With each class I taught, I grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally too. I was finding myself again, rediscovering the woman who loved her job, who took pride in her strength. One day, after a particularly grueling session, I sat down on a bench, catching my breath. That's when John walked in. I hadn't seen him since our meeting at the cafe months ago. "Hello," he said, a tentative smile on his face. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. How are you?" I stood up, surprised but pleased to see him. "I'm doing well, thank you. It's good to see you, John." We talked for a while, about mundane things at first, the weather, the gym. Then, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. "I never got the chance to thank you properly," I said, my voice sincere. "Your help. It changed everything for me." John's smile was warm. "I'm just glad I could do something to make amends. You've come a long way." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to grab a coffee sometime? No pressure, just as friends." The invitation caught me off guard, but it was a pleasant surprise. "I'd like that," I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. As I watched him leave the gym, I felt a flutter of excitement, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was the beginning of something new, a chance to explore life from a fresh perspective. That night, as I lay in bed in my new apartment, I thought about the twists and turns my life had taken. There was still pain and healing ahead, but there was also hope. Hope for a future that was mine to shape. The dawn of a new day was breaking, and I was ready to meet it head on. The journey of life, I've come to realize, is never a straight path. It twists and turns, bringing challenges and surprises along the way. Since my divorce, I've been rediscovering who I am, but not without unexpected obstacles. Michael, unable to accept the end of our marriage, began reaching out, trying to rekindle what we once had. His persistence, a stark contrast to his earlier indifference, forced me to seek legal means to ensure my peace. It was a difficult decision, but necessary for my well-being. The day I stood in court, asking for a restraining order, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. Sadness for what our relationship had become, and determination to protect my newfound independence. Meanwhile, my relationship with John was blossoming into something beautiful and profound. He was a constant source of support and understanding. On one of our dates, as we walked along a riverbank under the stars, he turned to me and said something that stayed with me. "You know, you were always beautiful, even with your scars. It's just that not everyone can look past the surface. Not everyone can see into the soul." I looked at him, touched by his words. "Thank you, John. That means more to me than you can imagine." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's the truth, and I'm grateful for every part of you." That night, as I lay in bed, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My journey had been fraught with pain and heartache, but it had also led me to a place of self-acceptance and love. I realized then that the most profound form of love isn't about how we look or what we have. It's about being loved for our soul, for the essence of who we are. John saw me for me, scars and all, and cherished what he saw. Life had come full circle, but in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had lost a life I thought was perfect, only to find a deeper, more meaningful existence. I had learned to love myself and found someone who loved me for the person I had become. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength gained, and for the love that had found its way into my life. I had emerged from the shadows of my past, stepping into a future bright with promise and hope.
My name is Emily, and I'm just your average 29-year-old woman living alone in a small, cozy apartment. Today, I'm sitting at my dining table, staring at the phone. It's been ringing on and off for the past hour, but I can't bring myself to answer it. It's Mark, my fiancé, wanting to talk about meeting my parents. The thought alone makes my stomach turn. Mark's voice comes through the voicemail again. "Hey, Em, just checking in. We really should plan on meeting your folks soon. Call me back, okay?" I let out a sigh and look around my apartment. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. The walls are lined with bookshelves, and a small balcony overlooks the city. It's my little haven, far away from the memories of my childhood. Growing up wasn't easy. My dad left us when I was 5. I still remember the day he walked out, suitcase in hand, not even a backward glance. Mom changed after that. She became distant, cold, and often angry. And somehow, I always seemed to be the target of her frustration. 2 years after Dad left, Mom remarried. My stepdad, Rick, was actually a decent guy. He tried to make things better, but Mom's attention was all on my little half-sister, Lily. Lily was everything I wasn't, or at least that's how Mom made it seem. She was showered with love and affection, while I was just there. I was snapped out of my thoughts by another call. It was Mark again. I finally picked up. "Hey, Mark," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Emily, I've been trying to reach you. So, when can we plan to meet your parents?" Mark's voice was full of excitement, oblivious to my hesitation. I'm not sure, Mark. It's complicated," I replied, fiddling with a pen on the table. "What's complicated?" "It's just dinner, Em. I really want to meet the people who raised my incredible fiancé." I let out a forced laugh. "You wouldn't say that if you knew my mom. She's a lot to handle." Mark went silent for a moment. "Is everything okay, Em? You know you can tell me anything." I took a deep breath. "It's just that my mom and we don't really have the best relationship. She's always been hard on me. It's nothing like your family. Mark's voice softened. I'm here for you, Emily. We'll figure this out together. Maybe it's time to face this, you know? I knew he was right, but the thought of facing my mom, of exposing Mark to her sharp tongue and cold demeanor, terrified me. Yeah, maybe, I said, not entirely convinced. Let's talk about it later. I need some time to think. Okay, Em. I love you. You know that, right? I know, Mark. I love you too. Sitting in my apartment, my mind wanders back to those early years after Dad left. They were tough, to say the least. Mom's whole world seemed to crumble, and her heartache turned into anger that was often directed at me. I remember one particularly hard day. I was 7, trying to do my homework at the kitchen table. Mom was pacing around, her face tight with worry and frustration. Emily, can't you see I'm busy? Stop making that racket with your pencil, she snapped suddenly. I looked up, startled. Sorry, Mom, I mumbled, trying to be quieter. It wasn't long after that when Mom met Rick. He was different, kind, and gentle. But Mom changed when she was with him. She seemed happier, but that happiness never really reached me. When Lily was born, it was like I became invisible. One evening, I overheard Mom talking to Rick in the living room. I wasn't meant to hear, but I did. She's just so difficult, Rick. Nothing like Lily. I don't know what to do with her. Mom's voice was full of frustration. I felt my heart sink. Even then, I knew she was talking about me. Rick tried to reason with her. She's just a kid, Helen. She needs your love, not your disappointment. But Mom wouldn't listen. She reminds me too much of him, she said bitterly. That night, I cried myself to sleep. It was clear I wasn't the daughter she wanted. As I got older, the gap between us only widened. When I was around 10, I remember trying to show Mom a drawing I'd done in school. Look, Mom, I got an A on this, I said, holding up my artwork. She barely glanced at it. That's nice, dear. Go show Rick. I'm busy. But Rick was different. He took one look at my drawing and smiled. This is fantastic, Emily. You're really talented. I remember how warm his praise felt, but it couldn't fill the void left by Mom's indifference. Those years were a blur of feeling like I didn't belong, like I was an outsider in my own home. Mom was always quick to point out my flaws, especially as I hit my teenage years. It was a constant stream of, don't slouch, that outfit is unflattering, or why can't you be more like Lily? My teenage years were like navigating a minefield, always cautious, trying not to set off another round of criticism or disapproval from Mom. I was 15 when the weight of her words really started to bear down on me. One evening, I was getting ready for a school dance. I had picked out a dress I thought looked pretty good on me. I twirled in front of the mirror in my room, feeling a rare moment of confidence. Mom, can you help me with my hair? I called out, stepping into the living room. Mom looked up from her magazine, her eyes scanning me up and down. You're wearing that? It's a bit snug, don't you think? You should really watch your weight. Her words hit me like a slap. I thought it looked okay, I stammered, my confidence shattering. Mom sighed, standing up. Let me do your hair. Maybe it'll draw attention away from your figure. I sat there in silence, feeling small and ashamed, as she roughly pulled my hair into a style. School wasn't much of an escape either. One day, I was sitting with a few classmates at lunch, talking about our families. So, Emily, what's your mom like? One of the girls, Sarah, asked casually. I hesitated, not sure how to answer. She's strict, very particular about things. Sarah seemed to sense the tension in my voice. Hey, it's okay. Moms can be tough. Mine's always on my case about grades. I forced a smile, appreciating her attempt to relate, but inside, I felt that my situation was different, more isolating. Back at home, things got even more strained when I started to show interest in boys. One time, I had a guy from school, Jake, come over to study. He was nice, funny, and I kind of liked him. We were in the living room, working on a project, when Mom walked in. She gave Jake a cold look before turning to me. "Emily, make sure you're actually studying and not distracting the boy with your silly crushes," she said, loud enough for Jake to hear. I was mortified. Jake looked uncomfortable, and the air was filled with awkwardness. After he left, I confronted Mom. "Why did you have to say that in front of Jake? It was so embarrassing." Mom shrugged, unfazed. "I'm just stating the obvious, Emily. Besides, boys like him aren't interested in girls with your build." Her words stung deeply, and from that point on, I was even more cautious about bringing friends, especially boys, home. During those years, I often sought refuge in Rick, my stepdad. He was always kinder, more understanding. One evening, when Mom was out, I opened up to him. "Rick, do you think I'm unattractive?" I asked hesitantly. Rick looked surprised. "Emily, you're beautiful. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise, not even your mom." By the time I hit my early 20s, my experiences with Mom had left a deep imprint on my confidence, especially when it came to relationships. I was always second-guessing myself, wondering if I was good enough. I remember dating a guy named Alex during college. He was sweet and seemed to genuinely like me. One day, I decided to introduce him to my family, despite my reservations about Mom. We were having dinner at my parents' house. Rick was his usual welcoming self, but Mom was another story. She had this way of giving backhanded compliments that could cut you down to seize. "So, Alex, what are you studying?" Mom asked, passing the salad. "Engineering," Alex replied, smiling. "I'm hoping to get into renewable energy projects after graduation." "That's ambitious. Hopefully, you're not biting off more than you can chew, like some people." Mom glanced at me as she said this, an obvious jab at my past academic struggles. I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. Alex seemed to sense the tension, but tried to keep the conversation light. The evening went downhill from there. Every time I said something, Mom found a way to twist it into a criticism. When Alex and I were leaving, I apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry about that, Alex. My mom can be difficult." Alex squeezed my hand. "Hey, it's not your fault, but it does make things a bit complicated, doesn't it?" I knew what he meant. The relationship eventually fizzled out. It wasn't just about that night, but it was a pattern. My insecurity, fueled by Mom's constant belittling, made it hard to maintain a healthy relationship. Fast forward a few years, and I met Mark. He was different, kind, patient, and he had a way of making me feel valued. But the scars from my past were always lurking beneath the surface. One evening, we were at my apartment, talking about our future. "Emily, I love you, and I want us to have a future together," Mark said, holding my hands. "I love you too, Mark, but I'm scared. My past, my mom, it's all so messy. I don't want to drag you into my issues." Mark looked into my eyes. "Your past doesn't define us. Yes, it's part of you, but it doesn't have to dictate our future. We'll face it together." The day of the dinner with my parents had me tangled in nerves. Mark, always optimistic, tried to ease my anxiety as we drove to my parents' house. "It's just dinner, Emily. It'll be okay," he reassured me, but my stomach churned with unease. We were greeted at the door by Rick, his warm smile a small comfort. "Emily, Mark, welcome. Come on in," he said cheerfully. Mom was in the kitchen, and as I saw her, I felt a familiar tension grip me. She managed a polite smile for Mark, but her eyes were distant. "Dinner's nearly ready. Why don't you both sit down?" she said, gesturing towards the dining table. The atmosphere was strained as we all sat down. Rick tried to lighten the mood, engaging Mark in conversation. "So, Mark, what do you do for a living?" Mark, unaware of the undercurrents, answered cheerfully. "I actually own a company. We specialize in environmental consulting." I saw a flicker of something in Mom's eyes at his response. Was it interest? Or maybe even greed? It was hard to tell. "That sounds impressive," Mom said, her tone suddenly more amicable. "A company owner, no less. You must be doing quite well for yourself." Her words had an edge, and I felt a familiar pang of discomfort. The rest of the dinner progressed tensely, with Mom alternating between subtly belittling me and praising my younger sister Lily, who wasn't even present. Every now and then, she would direct the conversation back to Mark, asking about his business and future plans. Each time, I saw that same glint in her eyes, like she was assessing his worth, not just as a person, but for what he could offer. As we left that evening, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. The ride home was quiet until Mark broke the silence. "Your mom seems interested in my business. A bit too interested, maybe?" I sighed, feeling drained. "Yeah, she has a way of evaluating people." "I'm sorry, Mark. This is just how it's always been." Mark squeezed my hand, his support unwavering. "We're in this together, Emily. Remember that." The next morning, after the dinner, I was still reeling from Mom's comments when Mark's phone rang. It was an unknown number. I watched as his expression changed from curiosity to shock. "Hang on. What did you just say?" Mark asked, his voice rising in disbelief. I could hear a faint, muffled voice on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. Mark hung up, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "That was your mom," he said, looking at me. She just proposed something outrageous." I felt a cold shiver down my spine. "What are you talking about, Mark?" He took a deep breath. "She suggested that I should leave you and consider marrying Lily instead." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "She said what?" Mark nodded, his face grim. "She said that you weren't right for me and that Lily would be a better fit. She was serious, Emily." I was speechless. The idea that my own mother would go to such lengths was beyond belief. "We need to do something about this," Mark said, his jaw set. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about exposing her for who she really is." I nodded, a mix of anger and determination building inside me. "We could record her saying it, catch her in the act." Mark agreed. "Let's do it. Let's show everyone her true colors." The plan was set. Mark would call my mom back, expressing interest in her proposal, and we would record the conversation. That evening, we sat in my living room, the phone on speaker. Mark dialed my mom's number, and I hit record on my phone. "Hello, Helen. It's Mark," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Mark, darling, I'm so glad you called back. Have you thought about what I suggested?" Mom's voice was sickly sweet. Mark played along. "Yes, I have. It's an interesting idea. But I need to know, why do you think Emily isn't right for me?" There was a pause, then Mom replied, "Oh, Mark, you're such a catch. You deserve someone better, someone like Lily. Emily has always been a bit of a disappointment." My heart ached hearing those words, but I stayed silent, letting the recording continue. "We should meet and discuss this further. Maybe over coffee?" Mark suggested. "That sounds wonderful. Let's do it. I'll arrange a time and place," Mom replied, her voice dripping with eagerness. After hanging up, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal. But there was also a sense of purpose. We had a plan, and it was time to expose Mom's true nature. The next few days were a blur of planning and apprehension. Mark and I were going to catch my mom in her own game. He arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown, and I decided to be there, disguised, so I could see everything for myself. On the day of their meeting, I wore a wig and oversized sunglasses, looking like someone completely different. I sat at a table with a clear view of them, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark arrived first, taking a seat at a table near the window. A few minutes later, Mom showed up, looking around before spotting Mark and walking over with a confident smile. "Mark, so good to see you," she said, sitting down. "Thanks for meeting me, Helen," Mark replied. "So, about your proposal..." Mom leaned in, her voice low. "I think it's for the best, Mark. Emily is not suitable for you. Lily, on the other hand, is perfect. She's everything Emily isn't." I felt a lump in my throat, listening to her words. Mark glanced in my direction, giving a subtle nod to indicate the recorder was on. "But why are you so against Emily?" Mark asked, playing his part perfectly. Mom sighed. "Between us, I never wanted Emily. Her father left, and she just reminds me of all the bad times. Lily is my real daughter, the one I actually care about." My hands were shaking under the table. Hearing Mom's words, so cold and heartless, was like a knife twisting in my gut. Mark changed the topic, discussing random things to keep the conversation going while the recorder captured every word. After about 30 minutes, they wrapped up, with Mom looking pleased with herself. As soon as Mom left, I removed my disguise and joined Mark. "I can't believe she said those things," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. Mark took my hands. "I'm so sorry, Emily, but now we have proof. What do you want to do with it?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. "We expose her, Mark, at the next family gathering. Everyone needs to know the truth." Mark nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll do it together. It's time everyone saw the real Helen." We left the cafe with a plan in mind, a plan to finally reveal my mom's true colors to everyone, especially to Rick, who had been in the dark for far too long. The tension was thick in the air as we all gathered at my parents' house for what was supposed to be a routine family dinner. Little did everyone know, Mark and I had a revelation planned that would change everything. As we sat down to eat, my mom, with a triumphant look in her eyes, couldn't hold back. "Emily, I have some news. Mark has seen the light. He's left you and is now interested in your sister, Lily." Lily's smile broadened across her face, a mirror image of Mom's smug expression. Rick, sitting beside them, looked absolutely shocked, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about, Helen?" Rick asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Before Mom could elaborate, Mark caught my eye and winked subtly. It was our cue. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The room fell silent as the recording of Mom's conversation with Mark filled the air. "I never wanted Emily. Her father left, and she just reminds me of all the bad times. Lily is my real daughter, the one I actually care about." As the recording continued, Mom's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. Rick looked at her, disbelief etched on his face. What is this, Emily?" Rick stammered, his voice filled with hurt. I looked directly at Mom. "That's you, talking to Mark, telling him to leave me for Lily, telling him how little you think of me." Mom tried to interrupt. "Emily, this is nonsense. You're just trying to..." "No, Mom," I cut her off, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "For once, you're going to listen. I only married Rick out of desperation. If I hadn't had Emily, I could have found someone richer, smarter, more promising. She's always been a burden." As the recording ended, the room was heavy with silence. Rick turned to Mom, his expression a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Helen, is this true? Did you really say these things?" Rick asked, his voice trembling. Mom was at a loss for words, her usual composure shattered. Rick stood up, pushing his chair back. "I can't believe this. All these years, I had no idea." He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I had no idea." Mom finally found her voice, but it was weak, defensive. "Rick, I didn't mean it. It was just talk." But Rick wasn't having it. "No, Helen, This is unforgivable. I need to think about all of this." He left the room quickly, leaving a heavy silence behind. Mom broke down, sobbing, her usual composed demeanor shattered. Lily sat frozen, her eyes darting between Mom and the door where Rick had exited. Mark took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You did the right thing, Emily." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It's over. It's finally over. In the following weeks, Rick filed for divorce. I didn't speak to Mom or Lily again. It was painful, but it was a necessary closure. Mark and I got married in a small ceremony. Rick was there, smiling through his tears. He was the only family I needed. As I stood there with Mark, I realized that I was finally free from the shadows of my past. I had found love, not just with Mark, but within myself. For the first time in my life, I felt truly happy and at peace.
My name is Eliza, and I thought I had it all figured out. At 30, I was married to the love of my life, Michael, and we lived in this cozy, though tiny apartment in one of the city's most sought-after areas. This place, with its quaint charm and memories, was a gift from my late grandmother. Michael and I were like two peas in a pod. He worked in finance, always dressed in those sharp suits that made him look so handsome. I worked in marketing, a job I loved for its creativity and pace. We were the perfect team, or so I thought. One lazy Sunday morning, as we were having breakfast, Michael brought up the topic of family, a conversation we had danced around for a while. "Eliza, I've been thinking," Michael began, his eyes serious, "about us, about starting a family." I felt a flutter in my heart. "Really? That's great. I've always dreamed of a big family," I replied, my voice filled with excitement. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I want that too, but let's wait until we have a bigger place. This apartment is too small for a family." I nodded, though a part of me felt a bit disappointed. "You're right. It makes sense. We should sell this place first, right?" "Exactly," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Once we sell your grandmother's apartment, we can buy a house big enough for, say, 3 or 4 kids." I laughed. 4 kids? That's a mini army. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. It was like a small cloud on a sunny day. Family gatherings were a big thing in Michael's family. His parents, Robert and Martha, were the warmest people you'd ever meet. They welcomed me into their family with open arms. Then there was Alex, Michael's younger brother, who was married to Sarah. They had 2 adorable kids, but Sarah and I never clicked. She was always a bit cold and distant, and sometimes downright rude. During one such family gathering at Michael's parents' house, she made a snide remark about my cooking. "Eliza, maybe you should stick to marketing and leave the cooking to us homemakers," she said, a fake smile plastered on her face. I remember feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Michael jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Hey, I love Eliza's cooking, right, Dad?" he said, looking at his father, who nodded in agreement. The evening passed with more awkward moments, but I tried to brush them off. I loved Michael, and I was determined to make things work, even with Sarah. As we lay in bed that night, I turned to Michael. "Do you think Sarah doesn't like me?" Michael, already half asleep, murmured, "Don't worry about her. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew that things were not as perfect as they seemed. And little did I know, my world was about to turn upside down. A few weeks had passed since that conversation with Michael about starting a family. The idea of waiting for a bigger home had settled in my mind, though I still held on to the dream of a large family. It was a chilly December morning, and I was tidying up the apartment while Michael was at work. I decided to clean out the coat closet. It was overflowing with jackets and coats we hardly wore. As I was going through Michael's coats, I felt something in the pocket of his winter jacket. Curious, I pulled it out. It was a receipt. At first, I thought it was just another receipt for coffee or something mundane, but this was different. It was a receipt for a scarlet-colored designer bag from a high-end store known for its romantic gifts. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be for me? I wondered aloud. a smile spreading across my face. Michael had never been the type to splurge on extravagant gifts, but maybe this was his way of showing his love, especially with Christmas just around the corner. That evening, when Michael came home, I decided not to mention the receipt. I wanted to act surprised when he gave me the gift. We sat down for dinner, and I couldn't help but feel a bit giddy. "Michael, what are we doing for Christmas?" I asked casually. He looked up from his plate. "Oh, the usual. Dinner at my parents'. Why, you got something special in mind?" I shook my head. No, just the usual sounds perfect. The days leading up to Christmas were busy with work and preparations for the holidays, but that receipt stayed in the back of my mind. I imagined how that scarlet bag would look with my New Year's outfit. Finally, it was Christmas Eve. We were at Michael's parents' house, the whole family buzzing with festive cheer. Presents were piled under the tree, and I kept sneaking glances at them, trying to spot a bag-shaped gift. "Eliza, can you help me with the dessert?" Martha, Michael's mom, called out from the kitchen. "Of course, Martha. Be right there," I replied, happy to lend a hand. As I helped her with the pie, I mentioned the gift. "Michael's been acting a bit secretive. I think he's planning a surprise for me." Martha smiled. "That boy always has something up his sleeve. You're good for him, Eliza." The time came to open the gifts. My heart raced as Michael handed me a medium-sized, neatly wrapped box. It didn't feel like a bag, but maybe. I tore open the wrapping paper to find a set of beautiful porcelain dishes. I looked up at Michael, confused. "Surprise! I know you've been wanting a new set for when we host dinners," he said, smiling. I forced a smile. "They're lovely, Michael. Thank you." But inside, I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Where was the scarlet bag? Why did he buy it if not for me? The Christmas dinner at Michael's parents' house was in full swing. The house was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of holiday lights. I tried my best to push the thoughts of the scarlet bag out of my mind and focus on the festivities. "Eliza, could you pass the gravy?" Alex, Michael's brother, asked from across the table. "Sure, here you go," I replied, passing the gravy boat down the table. Michael's parents were beaming, happy to have their family around them. His mother, Martha, always went all out for Christmas, and this year was no exception. The dinner was delicious, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. After dinner, we all moved to the living room for the gift exchange. I watched as Michael's nieces tore open their presents with glee, their faces lighting up with each new toy they uncovered. It wasn't until we were getting ready to leave that I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, slung over Sarah's shoulder, was a striking scarlet-colored designer handbag. It was unmistakable, the very same bag from the receipt I had found in Michael's coat. My mind raced as we said our goodbyes. I couldn't take my eyes off that bag. It was more than just a purse. It was a symbol of something hidden, something unspoken. On the drive home, the car was filled with an uneasy silence. Michael seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. As the city lights passed by, my mind replayed the evening, but this time I saw it through a different lens. I remembered the fleeting glances that Michael and Sarah had exchanged throughout the night. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but now they seemed glaringly obvious. The way their eyes met across the room, the brief smiles, the quick, hushed conversations when they thought no one was looking. "Is everything okay, Eliza? You've been awfully quiet." Michael's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to look at him, 1,000 questions on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to voice any of them, not yet. "I'm just a bit tired, that's all," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. The rest of the drive home was spent in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal creeping in. The man I loved, the life we had built together, suddenly everything seemed like a fragile facade, ready to crumble at any moment. In the days that followed Christmas, my mind was in turmoil, haunted by the sight of Sarah with that scarlet designer handbag and the subtle glances exchanged between her and my husband, Michael. The nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. One cold evening, as Michael sat idly flipping through TV channels, I decided to confront him. "Michael, can we talk? It's about the bag," I said, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. He looked at me with a casual expression. "What about it? I just helped Alex pick out a surprise for her, that's all." I took a deep breath. "I found the receipt, Michael. It was in your coat. Why didn't you tell me?" He let out a small laugh, trying to wave it off. "Oh, that. It was just a favor for Alex. You're thinking too much into it, Eliza." His response did little to soothe my suspicions. Later that night, as Michael lay asleep, I mustered up the courage to look through his phone. My heart pounded as I scrolled through his messages and stumbled upon a thread that would change everything. The conversation between Michael and Sarah was not just flirty. It was intimate, revealing a deep and long-standing affair. But the true shock came when I read a message where they discussed the biggest secret of all. Alex's children were actually Michael's. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband had been in a relationship with his brother's wife, and the children I'd come to adore as my nephews were in fact my stepchildren. I felt sick to my stomach as I read message after message. They spoke of love, of a future together, and, most shockingly, of convincing me to sell the apartment and move the money to a joint account. Tears streamed down my face as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. I was quick to screenshot the messages, sending them to my email for safekeeping. With a heavy heart, I deleted any trace of my actions from his phone and lay back, my mind spinning with the enormity of the deception. The next morning, I played the part of the unsuspecting wife. Over breakfast, Michael brought up selling our apartment, a conversation we'd had previously. "So, what do you think about the sale? It could be a good move for us." I nodded, my mind racing with plans of my own. "Yes, let's sell it. It's time for a new beginning," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos within. He smiled, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. That's my girl, always so decisive. Little did he know, I was thinking about my future, but it was a future that was starting to look very different from the one we had planned together. Armed with the bitter truth about Michael's affair and the shock of his betrayal, I knew I needed to act smartly and swiftly. I put on a mask of normalcy in front of Michael while planning my next steps. A few days later, I made an appointment with a lawyer, Mrs. Jenkins, a recommendation from a close friend. Sitting in her office, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mrs. Jenkins, I have proof of my husband's infidelity, and it's not just any affair. He's been involved with his brother's wife, and their children are actually his," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Jenkins listened intently, her expression serious. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Eliza. Let's go over the evidence you have. We need to plan your next steps carefully." I showed her the screenshots of the messages between Michael and Sarah. She took notes, nodding her head thoughtfully. "This is quite damning evidence. We can use this in your favor, especially in terms of the financial settlement," Mrs. Jenkins said. "However, I advise discretion until we have everything in place. Are you prepared to go through with a divorce?" "Yes, I am. I can't be with someone who's betrayed me like this," I replied, a sense of resolve building within me. Mrs. Jenkins outlined a plan. First, we'd secure my financial assets, especially the money from the apartment sale. Then, we'd proceed with filing for divorce, using the evidence to negotiate a favorable settlement. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. There was a long road ahead, but I was ready to take it. Back at home, I continued to act as if everything was normal. Michael, oblivious to my discovery and the impending storm, was focused on the apartment sale. "So, I talked to a real estate agent today. He said we could get a good price for the apartment," Michael said one evening over dinner. "That's great news," I replied, keeping my emotions in check. "Do you think it's a good time to put it on the market?" "Absolutely. The sooner we sell, the sooner we can start looking for a new place," he said, unaware of the irony in his words. As the days passed, I worked closely with Mrs. Jenkins, preparing all the necessary documents and securing my financial position. Every conversation with Michael, every smile, was a performance. But it was a performance I needed to maintain a little longer until everything was ready. The day we listed the apartment for sale, Michael was ecstatic. "This is it, Eliza, our new beginning." Little did he know, it was indeed the beginning of something new, but not the future he envisioned. My heart ached with the pain of betrayal, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. The plot I was weaving wasn't just for retribution, it was for my independence and a fresh start. As the new year approached, the plans I had been carefully laying with Mrs. Jenkins were coming together. My facade of normalcy with Michael remained intact, even as my heart grew heavier each day. The final act of my plan was set to unfold during the New Year's Eve party at Michael's parents' house. It was there that I would reveal everything. The evening of the party arrived, and the house was buzzing with the usual festive cheer. Michael's parents had outdone themselves with decorations, and the air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I mingled with the family, all the while feeling like I was in the eye of a storm. Michael was in high spirits, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Eliza, you seem a bit quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Michael asked as we found a moment alone in the kitchen. "Just thinking about the new year and all the changes it'll bring," I said, my voice steady. He smiled and wrapped his arm around me. "It's going to be our best year yet." If only he knew. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around with glasses in hand, ready to count down to the new year. I took a deep breath, knowing that my moment was near. As the clock struck 12 and everyone cheered, I turned to Michael. "Before we celebrate too much, I have a special gift for you," I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I handed him a small, neatly wrapped box. The room quieted as all eyes turned to us. Michael, looking surprised, unwrapped the box. Inside were the divorce papers and a printout of the messages I had found on his phone. His face drained of color as he realized what they were. "What is this, Eliza?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over, Michael. I know about you and Sarah. I know about everything," I said, my voice clear and strong. The room erupted into chaos. Michael's parents looked shocked. His brother Alex was speechless, and Sarah, who had been standing near the back, looked like she might faint. "What are you talking about, Eliza?" Michael's mother asked, confusion and concern in her voice. "Michael has been having an affair with Sarah, and her children are his," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah started crying, and Alex, who had been silent up until now, turned to his brother. "Is this true, Michael? Tell me this isn't true." Alex's voice was filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Michael couldn't meet his brother's eyes. The truth was out there for everyone to see, and there was no escaping it. The revelation at the New Year's Eve party sent shockwaves through the room. Michael's family, once a picture of unity and joy, was now a scene of chaos and disbelief. The truth about Michael's affair with Sarah and their plan to embezzle the money from my apartment sale was out, and the reactions were immediate and intense. Michael's mother, Martha, looked at him with a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "Michael, how could you? And with Sarah? To think you were planning to steal from Eliza and run away?" Before Michael could respond, I added, "And it's not just the affair. They were planning to use the money from the sale of my apartment to leave the country." The room went silent. The gravity of the betrayal hung heavy in the air. Then, Martha, overcome with emotion, fainted, causing a stir as family members rushed to her side. Michael stood there, looking lost and defeated. His father, Robert, shook his head in disgust. "I can't believe you would do this to your own family, to your own brother." Alex, who had been silent, his face a mask of shock and hurt, finally spoke. "Michael, I don't even know who you are anymore." Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably, her tears doing little to garner any sympathy. The family was too stunned and hurt by the depth of their deceit. With Martha being attended to and the room in disarray, I knew this was my moment to make my stand. I raised my voice, ensuring everyone heard me clearly. "I am filing for divorce from Michael, and I won't just stop there. I will be seeking financial compensation for this betrayal from both Michael and Sarah." The words felt empowering to say out loud. It was a declaration of my independence and my refusal to be a victim of their selfishness. Michael tried to approach me, a look of desperation in his eyes. "Eliza, please, let me explain." I held up my hand to stop him. "There's nothing you can say to justify what you've done. You and Sarah have made your choices. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences. The months following the New Year's Eve revelation were a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings were tough, but with each passing day, I felt a sense of liberation growing within me. I was no longer bound to a relationship built on lies and deceit. One sunny afternoon, after finalizing the last of the divorce papers, I sat in a cafe, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the journey I had been through. "You look like you're a million miles away," my friend Clara said as she joined me at the table. "Just thinking about everything that's happened," I replied, offering a small smile. "You've handled it all with such grace, Eliza. I'm proud of you," she said, her eyes full of genuine sympathy. "Thanks, Clara. It wasn't easy, but I feel like I can finally start fresh now," I said, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. With the divorce settled, I had kept the apartment and received a significant financial settlement from Michael. As for him, his reputation had taken a severe hit, and he lost his job due to the scandal. Sarah and Alex had also gone their separate ways, with the family ties deeply strained. "I heard Michael moved out of the city," Clara mentioned, stirring her coffee. "Yes, he did. And honestly, I'm relieved. It's easier to move on knowing he's not around," I admitted. "And what's next for Eliza?" Clara asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. I thought for a moment. "I want to focus on myself for a while. Maybe travel, pick up some hobbies that I've been neglecting, and who knows, perhaps even start dating again when I'm ready." "That sounds wonderful. You deserve all the happiness in the world," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. As we chatted and laughed, I felt a sense of hope for the future. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. I had emerged stronger and more self-assured. The story of my marriage and its dramatic end would always be a part of me, but it was now just that, a part of my past. Ahead of me lay a path filled with new possibilities and opportunities for growth and happiness. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. A fresh start, a new beginning, and a life that I was ready to embrace fully.
My name is Emily, a 25-year-old with a life many would envy. My career in marketing had taken off faster than I dared to dream, and I was surrounded by a group of friends who were more like family. But for all my success, my love life was a series of unremarkable dates and fleeting connections. That was until a regular evening turned into something out of a storybook. It was a casual dinner with friends at a new restaurant, Savory Secrets. The place had a buzz about it, a mix of modern chic and cozy comfort. I was there with Sarah, my college roommate turned confidant, and Mike, the friend who always had my back. We were celebrating my latest promotion, and I remember feeling a mix of pride and excitement. "Emily, you seriously need to take a break and enjoy yourself. You've earned it," Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. Mike chimed in. "Yeah, maybe you'll even meet someone interesting tonight. This place is swarming with potential." I laughed it off, focusing more on the intriguing menu. That's when Mark, the chef, approached our table. He was charismatic, with an easy smile and an apron that told stories of his culinary battles. "Evening, folks. I'm Mark, the head chef. I couldn't help but overhear it's a special occasion. Mind if I recommend something off-menu? It's a creation I'm particularly proud of." His confidence was intriguing. "Sure, why not? Surprise us," I replied, intrigued by this unexpected interaction. As Mark walked away, Sarah nudged me. "He's definitely interesting, right?" I brushed off her suggestion, focusing instead on the ambiance and the laughter of my friends. But I couldn't deny there was something about Mark that caught my attention. When the dishes arrived, they were a work of art. The flavors were complex and delightful, a perfect balance of innovation and comfort. Mark returned to check on us, and we struck up a conversation. He spoke about his journey as a chef, his dreams, and his passion for food. It was captivating to see someone so dedicated to their craft. "You really have a talent for this," I found myself saying. "This dish is amazing." Mark's eyes lit up with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. I hope I can cook for you again sometime." The night continued with more laughter and stories, but there was an undercurrent of something new and exciting. As we left the restaurant, Mark caught up with us at the door. "It was great meeting you all. Emily, I hope to see you back here soon. Maybe next time you can try another one of my special creations." His words lingered with me as we walked away. Sarah and Mike teased me about the obvious spark, but I brushed it off as just a pleasant encounter. Over the next few days, thoughts of Mark and his culinary magic kept drifting into my mind. There was an undeniable connection, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of curiosity, of wanting to know more about this person who had appeared so unexpectedly in my life. Returning to Savory Secrets became a new routine for me. Each visit was an opportunity to dive deeper into conversations with Mark. Our chats moved from culinary arts to dreams, aspirations, and shared laughs. It was refreshing, easy, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other outside the restaurant. One evening, as we walked through the city park, Mark turned to me and said, "You know, Emily, I've never met anyone who gets my jokes as much as you do." I laughed. "Well, I've never met anyone who can cook as well as you do. Guess we're even." Our dates were simple but special. We'd go for long walks, try out new cafes, or sometimes just sit and talk for hours. It felt like we'd known each other for years, not just weeks. One night, sitting on his couch, sharing stories of our childhood, Mark looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Emily, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm rushing things, but I feel something strong for you, something I haven't felt in a long time." His vulnerability struck a chord in me. "Mark, I feel the same way. It's like we found something rare and precious." The conversation that night was a turning point. We both acknowledged the deep connection we felt, and it wasn't long before we were talking about a future together. Things moved fast, and some of my friends, like Sarah, were cautious. "Emily, aren't you two moving too fast? I mean, it's great, but it's only been a couple of months," Sarah expressed her concern one day over coffee. "I know it seems quick, Sarah, but with Mark, it just feels right. I can't explain it," I replied, trying to convey the certainty I felt in my heart. Mark's passion wasn't just limited to his work. He was equally passionate about our relationship. He'd surprise me with little notes, impromptu dates, and always made sure to listen and understand me. It was a level of attention and care I hadn't experienced before. One evening, while we were having dinner at my place, Mark brought up the topic of marriage. "Emily, I've been thinking, what we have is unique. I don't want to wait to start our life together. How would you feel about getting married?" I remember feeling a rush of emotions, excitement, joy, a little bit of fear, but above all, a deep sense of connection. "Mark, I would love that. There's nothing I want more than to be with you." Our engagement was a whirlwind. We planned a small, intimate wedding, just close friends and family. The day was perfect, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future together. Looking back, those months were a blur of happiness. I had found someone who understood me, who shared my passions, and who made every day brighter. It was a romance out of a fairy tale, and I was fully immersed in the magic of it all. Our first year of marriage, a blend of joy and adjustments, was unfolding in ways I hadn't anticipated. The home I had always known took on new life with Mark's presence. Our routines intermingled, my early morning jogs followed by his meticulously crafted breakfasts, the quick kisses before rushing to our respective jobs, and the quiet evenings when we both managed to be home together. But beneath the surface of our domestic bliss, a current of tension was slowly rising. Mark's commitment to his work was admirable, yet it began to take a toll on our time together. His hours at the restaurant extended late into the night, leaving me in a quiet house, thoughts wandering to the growing distance between us. One night, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, I decided to voice my concerns. "Mark, I love that you're so passionate about your work, but these long hours? I miss you. Is there any way you can cut back a bit?" He looked at me, his face etched with a mix of concern and an unspoken pressure. "Emily, you know I'm doing this for us. I need to match your success, to contribute equally. I don't want you to feel like you're carrying the burden alone." "It's not about the money, Mark. I just wish we had more time together," I replied, the words tinged with a longing for our earlier days. The conversation ended on a note of mutual understanding, but the issue remained unresolved, hanging in the air like an unsaid promise. It was amidst this delicate balance of work and home life that Mark approached me with a request, his voice laced with hesitancy. "Emily, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's my mom. She's having a tough time financially, and I was thinking maybe we could help her out, like $1,000 a month." I paused, taking in the weight of his request. His mother, a sweet woman who had welcomed me with open arms, was now in need. "Of course we can help, Mark," I said, my decision firm. "She's family, and it's important to support each other." Mark's relief was evident. "Thank you, Emily. This means a lot to me, and I know it will to her as well." So, we started a new routine. Each month, I would give Mark the money, and he would send it to his mother. I didn't control this process because I trusted him completely. It was a decision made from compassion, a gesture to support someone we both cared about. Yet, even as we settled into this new arrangement, the earlier issue of Mark's work hours remained a gentle undercurrent in our daily life. He worked too much, stayed in the restaurant for a long time, and often did not answer the phone. The routine of our married life continued, with me diligently transferring money each month for Mark's mother, and Mark immersing himself ever deeper into his work at the restaurant. Despite the semblance of normalcy, an undercurrent of loneliness persisted in the wake of his prolonged absences. I kept myself busy, focusing on my career, but the solitude in our home was palpable. It was during one of these routine evenings that a call from Lily, a friend living on the other side of town, stirred a whirlpool of doubts in my mind. "Emily, I've seen Mark around here quite often. He's always going to the same house with large packages in hand. It's been happening for a while now." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Are you sure it's Mark?" "Yes, I'm certain. It's just odd, don't you think?" Lily's voice was laced with concern. That night, I confronted Mark. His arrival home was met with my anxious query. "Mark, Lily says she's seen you frequently at a house on the west side. What are you doing there?" For a moment, there was a flicker of alarm in Mark's eyes. "Oh, that! It's nothing to worry about. Our restaurant has taken on a community project. We're helping out some elderly and needy people in that area with food and necessities." His explanation seemed plausible, yet something in the back of my mind nagged at me. "But why didn't you tell me about this project?" "It didn't seem important. It's just part of the job," he replied casually, but I could sense a hint of discomfort. Wanting to believe him, yet unable to shake off my doubts, I pressed further. "Can you show me something about this project? It just seems a bit unusual." Mark paused for a moment, then took out his phone. He scrolled through his photos and showed me a picture of himself standing next to an elderly man, both smiling at the camera. "See, this is Mr. Thompson, one of the people we're helping." The photo did bring some reassurance, but the seeds of doubt had already been sown. The smile on Mark's face in the picture seemed genuine, and the elderly man looked like someone who could use the help. Yet, why did I feel like something was still amiss? That night, as I lay in bed, Mark's regular breathing beside me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering suspicion. The photograph had partly allayed my fears, but Lily's words echoed in my mind, and a small part of me still questioned the truth of Mark's explanation. The days following the conversation about the charity work and the photograph Mark showed me slipped by in a haze of half-hearted reassurance. I wanted to believe Mark, to trust in the life we had built together, but the seeds of doubt, once planted, refused to wither away. My uneasy peace was shattered one afternoon by an unexpected delivery. A courier van stopped in front of our house, and a young man rang the doorbell, a large box in his arms. "Package for you," he said, handing me a clipboard. Confused, I looked at the box and then at the delivery note. "There must be some mistake. We didn't order this." He checked the address and the name on the note. "It's all here, correct address, signed off by a Mark. It's baby supplies, diapers, baby food." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Baby supplies?" "Yeah. You sure they're not yours?" he asked, a puzzled look crossing his face. "No, they're not," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The courier scratched his head. "Well, maybe your husband ordered them for someone else. He orders similar stuff to another address quite often." His words struck me like a lightning bolt. Another address? The same one Lily had mentioned seeing Mark go to with packages? I handed the box back to the courier. "There's been a mix-up. These aren't for us." The courier seemed to sense my distress. "Maybe your husband just got the addresses mixed up." "Happens sometimes." As he drove away, I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. The coincidence was too glaring, the implications too stark to ignore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Determined, I went inside, grabbed my keys, and headed straight to my car. The address, the same one Lily had seen Mark visiting, was now my destination. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, each turn bringing me closer to a truth I both dreaded and needed to confront. The drive felt surreal, as if I were moving through a fog of disbelief. How could my life, which seemed so perfect, unravel so quickly? What was waiting for me at that address? I tried to brace myself for what I might find, but deep down, I knew nothing could prepare me for the reality of betrayal. As I neared the address, my heart pounded in my chest. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The house in front of me looked ordinary, yet it held the key to the secrets Mark had been keeping. Standing at the doorstep of the unknown, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The door opened, and a young woman appeared, her eyes curious and a little cautious. She was holding a toddler, no more than a year old. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at me with a puzzled expression. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking for Mark. Is he here?" Her eyebrows knitted in confusion. "Mark. Yes, he's here. Who are you?" Before I could answer, Mark appeared behind her. The look on his face when he saw me was a mix of shock and fear. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I could barely find my words. The sight of him in this setting felt like a punch to the gut. "I could ask you the same, Mark. What's going on? Who is this woman, and why are you here?" The woman looked from me to Mark, a growing sense of realization dawning on her face. "Mark, who is she?" Mark's voice was shaky. "This is Emily, my wife." The word wife hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. The woman's face turned pale, and she stepped back, her gaze fixed on Mark. "Your wife. You told me you were divorced." I felt the ground beneath me shift. "Divorced? Mark, what is she talking about?" Mark's eyes darted between me and the woman, his usual composure crumbling. "Emily, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Explain? How can you explain this?" The toddler in the woman's arms began to fuss, sensing the tension. She looked at Mark with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You need to leave, Mark. Now." Mark hesitated, his gaze lingering on the child, then turned to me. "Emily, please, let me explain. This is all a big misunderstanding." But the pieces had already fallen into place. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the baby supplies. It was all clear now. Mark had a life here, a life I knew nothing about. "Save it, Mark. There's nothing you can say," I said, my voice breaking. I turned and walked away, the sound of the closing door marking the end of the life I thought I had with Mark. The drive back home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of Mark's betrayal sank in. He had been living a double life, and I had been oblivious, trusting him while he lied to me every day. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. The life I had built with Mark, the dreams we shared, everything felt tainted. I sat there, alone, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just discovered. The future I had envisioned with Mark was gone, replaced by a painful uncertainty and a deep sense of betrayal. The days following the revelation felt like walking through a fog. I moved through the motions of my daily life, but everything seemed dull and distant. The pain of Mark's betrayal was a constant ache, a reminder of the trust I had placed in him and how it had been shattered. Mark tried to reach out, his messages and calls filling up my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed space, time to think and to heal. The idea of facing him, of hearing his explanations, was more than I could bear. A few days later, I sat down with Sarah, my closest friend. Over cups of coffee in my now too quiet kitchen, I poured out the whole story. She listened, her face a mixture of anger and sympathy. "I can't believe he would do this to you, Emily. You deserve so much better," Sarah said, her hand reaching out to cover mine. "I just don't understand how I missed it. The signs were all there," I replied, the weight of my naivety heavy on my shoulders. "It's not your fault, Em. He lied to you. You trusted your husband, which is what anyone would do," she reassured me. Sarah's words were a small comfort, but the wound was still fresh. I knew I had to make a decision about my future, about my marriage. With Sarah's encouragement, I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. The lawyer was sympathetic but professional, outlining the steps for a divorce and what I could expect in terms of legal proceedings. "I want compensation for this betrayal," I said, a newfound determination in my voice. "We'll do everything we can to ensure a fair outcome," the lawyer assured me. The process was draining, both emotionally and legally. Mark's attempts to explain and reconcile turned into pleas for forgiveness as the reality of the divorce proceedings set in. But for me, the trust was broken beyond repair. In the midst of the legal battle, I also had to confront the financial deceit. The money I had given him under the pretense of helping his mother, it was meant for his second family. I supported his mistress and child. Unraveling our joint finances and reclaiming what was rightfully mine became another battleground. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I leaned heavily on my friends and family for support. They were my rock, providing comfort and strength when I felt overwhelmed by the chaos that my life had become. Finally, the day came when the divorce was finalized. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of a chapter in my life that had started with so much promise, but ended in deception. Standing in the now empty house, I realized that this was not just an end, but also a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to find myself again after being lost in the shadow of a relationship built on lies. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. With the support of my loved ones and the lessons I had learned, I knew I could move forward, stronger and wiser.
My name's Camilla, and I'm 30 years old. I live in a cozy house, a place full of memories, left to me by my dear grandmother. It's been my sanctuary, my little world where everything just feels right. But, as life would have it, not everything outside these walls is as peaceful. You see, my family is a bit of a mixed bag. There's my husband John, a man of few words, who always seems to be caught in the middle of things. We've had our ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? Then there's my father-in-law, Robert. He was a gem, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile. I always wondered how he ended up with Helen, my mother-in-law. To put it nicely, Helen is difficult. And that's me being polite. And let's not forget Lucy, John's sister. She lives nearby with her husband and kids in a rented apartment. Lucy and I never really clicked. Maybe it's because she's so much like Helen. I remember this one evening, a typical family dinner at our place. Robert was there, and as usual, he was the life of the party. "Camilla, this lasagna is divine," Robert said with a grin, taking another hearty bite. "Thank you, Robert. It's Grandma's recipe," I replied with a smile. Helen, on the other hand, barely touched her food. She just pushed it around her plate, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "It's a bit too salty, don't you think?" she said, her voice sharp. John shot me an apologetic glance across the table. I just shrugged it off. "That's Helen for you, always a critic." Lucy chimed in. "Mom, it's fine. Not everyone has your taste buds." The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered, as it always did when Helen was around. After dinner, Robert pulled me aside. "Camilla, I just want to say I really appreciate how you handle Helen. You have the patience of a saint." I laughed. "Well, I try, Robert, but it's not easy." He patted my shoulder. "You're doing great, dear. Just hang in there." If only I knew then how much more hanging in there I'd have to do. That's the thing about life in our little family. You never know what's coming next, especially with Helen and Lucy in the mix. But back then, it was just the usual. A little bit of discomfort, a lot of biting my tongue and trying to keep the peace. Little did I know, the storm was just around the corner. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. And one of those came crashing into our lives one cold, dreary morning. Robert, the one person who brought some light into our often tense family gatherings, passed away. It was sudden, a heart attack, they said. He was the glue that held us all together, and without him, things started to unravel quickly. The day after we got the news, I found myself in our kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, lost in thought. John walked in, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. "He was the best dad anyone could ask for," John said, his voice heavy with sadness. I reached out, placing my hand over his. "I know, honey. He was wonderful. We're going to miss him so much." John nodded, wiping away a tear. "Mom's taking it hard. She's a mess." That wasn't hard to imagine. Helen without Robert was like a ship without a rudder, lost and directionless. And true to form, she became more difficult than ever. Every phone call with her was like walking on eggshells. A week later, we were at Helen's house. Lucy was there too, her eyes red from crying. The air was thick with grief and unspoken tension. "We need to talk about what's next for Mom," Lucy said, breaking the uneasy silence. John sighed. "Yeah, we do. She can't be alone in that big house. She needs someone around, just in case." Helen's gaze shifted to me, her eyes narrowing. "I don't want strangers in my house. What about Camilla? She's home most of the time." I felt my heart sink. This was not what I had signed up for. "Helen, maybe you could stay with Lucy. She's got more space, and the kids would love to have you around." But Helen shook her head, her lips a thin line. "Lucy's place is always so noisy, and I can't stay in this house filled with memories of Robert." The conversation went around in circles, with no one willing to back down. Lucy seemed relieved at the thought of not having her mother move in with her. John looked torn between his mother and me, not sure which side to take. We left Helen's house that day with no resolution in sight. I could feel the storm clouds gathering, a sense of dread settling over me. How were we going to navigate this? How was I going to deal with Helen under my own roof, in the house that was once my sanctuary? As we drove home, John reached for my hand. "We'll figure this out, Camilla. Together, we will defend our independence." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. The air was tense when we all gathered again at Helen's house. The living room felt smaller than usual, crowded with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Lucy was there, fidgeting nervously, while her husband Mark tried to look anywhere but at Helen. John and I sat on the edge of our seats, bracing for whatever was coming. "So, have we decided what to do about Mom? Lucy finally broke the silence. Helen, who had been staring out the window, turned sharply. "I've made up my mind," she declared. "I'm giving this house to you, Lucy, and I'm moving in with Camilla and John." My jaw dropped. "What? Helen, we didn't discuss this." Lucy's face lit up, a stark contrast to the shock on mine. "Really, Mom? That would be great." John looked at me and tried to intervene. "Mom, we need to talk about this. It's not that simple." Helen's eyes narrowed. "What's there to talk about? Camilla has plenty of space, and she works from home. It's settled." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Helen, this is a big decision. And what about Lucy? She has more room, and the kids—" Helen cut me off. "Lucy's house is always in chaos with those children. I need peace and quiet." John gave me a helpless look, clearly torn. "Camilla, maybe we can make it work. For a while, at least." So Helen hasn't changed her mind since our last meeting. I felt my frustration mounting. "John, we can't just rearrange our lives because Helen decides so. What about our privacy? Our life?" Lucy chimed in, her voice a little too eager and triumphantly. "Camilla, think about it. Mom needs us now. You wouldn't want her to be alone, would you?" I felt like I was being cornered, my own home slipping away from me. "It's not about that, Lucy. It's about making a decision that affects all of us. We need to think this through." But it was clear that Helen had made up her mind, and Lucy was all too happy to support her decision. John turned out to be too soft, not independent, to make a decision in our favor. As we left Helen's house that day, the weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders. I was about to lose the one place where I had always felt safe and at peace, my sanctuary, and there was nothing I could do about it. The days following that dreaded meeting were some of the longest in my life. I tried to argue with John, to make him see reason, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "Camilla, she's my mother. What do you want me to do? Turn her away?" It wasn't that I wanted to turn Helen away. I just wanted a say in what happened in my own home. But it seemed like my say didn't count for much. Before I knew it, the day came when Helen moved in. She arrived with more luggage than I thought possible for one person. My once serene living room was now cluttered with her things. "I hope you don't mind, Camilla. I need all my things around me," Helen said, directing the movers here and there. I forced a smile, hiding my frustration. "Of course, Helen. Make yourself at home." As the days turned into weeks, my patience wore thin. Helen had a way of making her presence felt in every corner of the house. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I arranged the living room furniture. One evening, as I was trying to make dinner, Helen came into the kitchen. "You're cutting the carrots all wrong. Here, let me show you how it's done." I bit my tongue, handing her the knife. "Sure, Helen, show me." John walked in just then, and I could see he was trying to gauge the situation. "Everything okay here?" "Just teaching Camilla a thing or two about cooking," Helen said, a hint of smugness in her voice. I kept quiet, focusing on the onions I was chopping. John lingered for a moment, an awkward spectator, before mumbling something about checking the mail and leaving the kitchen. It wasn't just the constant criticism that got to me. It was the way Helen managed to turn John against me. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he accused me of being insensitive. "Camilla, she's going through a tough time. Can't you just cut her some slack?" John would say. I felt like I was losing not just my home, but my husband too. Then came the day when Helen decided she didn't like the color of the living room walls. "They're too dull. We need something brighter." I found myself reluctantly agreeing to repaint the room, just to keep the peace. As I watched the painters covering my once favorite shade of blue with a garish yellow that Helen had picked, I realized how much of my life I was giving up. My home didn't feel like mine anymore, and I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. Living with Helen was like being on a never-ending roller coaster, except there were no thrilling moments, just a constant churning in the pit of my stomach. She had a complaint for everything. The food wasn't to her taste, the house wasn't clean enough, and the TV was never on the channel she liked. One evening, as I was trying to finish up some work on my laptop, Helen barged into the room, the TV remote in her hand. "Camilla, this TV is driving me nuts. I can't find my show." I sighed, closing my laptop. Let me help you, Helen. As I flipped through the channels, trying to find her show, Helen muttered under her breath about how everything was better at her house. John walked in at that moment, and I looked up at him, hoping for some support. John, can you please help your mother with the TV? I'm trying to finish my work. John frowned, looking from me to Helen. Can't you see she's struggling, Camilla? It's just a TV show. I felt a surge of frustration. It's not just about the TV, John. It's about having a little space to do my work, to have a moment of peace in my own house. Helen looked at John, her eyes welling up. I didn't mean to be a burden. I just wanted to watch my show. John's expression softened as he turned to his mother. Don't worry, Mom. I'll find your show. I watched as John took the remote from me and started channel surfing, trying to appease Helen. I felt invisible, unheard. The next day, Lucy dropped by with her kids. The house was chaotic, with the kids running around and Helen trying to dictate how to entertain them. I retreated to the kitchen to prepare some snacks, feeling overwhelmed. Lucy followed me into the kitchen, a smirk on her face. Looks like Mom's really settled in, huh? I didn't even try to mask my irritation. It's a lot, Lucy. It's not easy having your entire home life turned upside down. Lucy shrugged, unconcerned. Well, she's family. You just have to deal with it. That evening, as we all sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. Helen criticized the pasta I made. John was silent, and Lucy's kids were restless. I finally snapped. I can't do this anymore. I need some space, some respect in my own home. Helen gasped, and John shot me a look of disbelief. Camilla, how can you be so selfish? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Selfish? I've been nothing but accommodating. This is my home too, John. The argument escalated, voices raised, words flying like daggers. John stormed out of the room, and Helen sat there, looking smug. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the TV from the living room where Helen slept, I realized something had to change. I couldn't live like this anymore. But how was I going to make John see that? How was I going to reclaim my life? The days after the big argument were filled with a tense silence. John and I barely spoke, and Helen acted like she owned the place, more so than ever. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around to avoid any confrontations. But the universe seemed to have other plans for me. One day, I came home early from the grocery store. The house was unusually quiet. As I was putting away the groceries, I heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. It was Helen and Lucy, deep in conversation. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard what they were saying. And now I don't have to deal with yours noisy kids all day, Helen was saying with a chuckle. Moving in with Camilla and John was the best decision. Camilla does everything around the house, and I have all the peace I want. Lucy's voice was equally gleeful. And I get Dad's house without paying a dime. It worked out perfectly for us. My hands were shaking, and I felt a surge of anger like never before. They had been playing us all along. This wasn't about family or taking care of each other. It was a cold, calculated move. I stormed into the living room, my voice shaking with anger. I heard everything. How could you, Helen? And you, Lucy? Helen looked up, startled. Then her expression turned into one of defiance. What are you talking about, Camilla? We were just chatting. Lucy tried to play innocent. Yeah, Camilla, you must have misunderstood. But I was done being the understanding, accommodating daughter-in-law. No, I heard you both. You've been using us, manipulating the situation for your benefit. Helen's face hardened. You have no right to speak to me like that. I am your elder, and you should respect me. John walked in at that moment, confused. What's going on here? I turned to him, my eyes welling up with tears of frustration. John, they've been using us. Your mother and sister planned all this just so they could get what they wanted. John looked from me to Helen and Lucy, his expression one of disbelief. Is this true, Mom? Helen started to cry, playing the victim. She's lying, John. I would never do such a thing. John seemed torn, unsure of whom to believe. I could see the doubt in his eyes, and it broke my heart. He still didn't trust me. even after everything. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew things couldn't go on like this. I had to take a stand for my own sanity. The next day, I was going to have a serious talk with John. It was time to put an end to this charade, one way or another. That morning, I knew it was time for a frank conversation with John. The house was quiet, the tension from the previous night still lingering in the air. I waited in the kitchen, my thoughts racing, until John finally walked in, his face a mask of worry. "John, we need to talk about everything that's happening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He poured himself a coffee and sat down, looking exhausted. "Camilla, I just don't know what to think anymore." "Think about us, John. Your mother and sister are tearing us apart," I urged. Before we could delve deeper, Helen walked in, her timing too perfect. "John, are you going to let her speak about your family like that?" The conversation quickly heated up. I tried to explain, to make him see the truth, but Helen's presence was like a fuse, igniting John's temper. "You're being unreasonable, Camilla. How can you be so heartless towards my mother?" John's voice rose with each word. Frustrated and desperate, I shot back, "Heartless? I'm trying to save our home, our marriage." In the heat of the moment, Helen clutched her chest dramatically, gasping, "My heart? How can you do this to me?" John spun around, his anger flaring. "Look what you're doing to her, Camilla!" And then, in a flash of fury, John's hand struck my face. The shock of it silenced the room. Helen stood there, a triumphant grin barely hidden. I touched my lip, feeling the sting of the slap and the flowing blood, and the reality of what just happened hit me. My husband had chosen his manipulative mother over me, our marriage. Without a word, I picked up the phone and called the police. As I waited for them, I began to pack Helen's and John's belongings, methodically, my movements fueled by a mix of hurt and determination. John tried to apologize, his anger now replaced with anxiety. "Camilla, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." But it was too late. "I'm filing for divorce, John. I can't be in a marriage where I'm not respected, where I'm not safe." The police arrived, and I explained everything. John and Helen were quiet, the reality of their situation finally dawning on them. After the police left, I dragged the suitcases to the front door. Helen's face was a picture of shock as I placed them outside. "This is your stuff. You need to leave now," I said, my voice void of any emotion. John picked up the suitcases, his eyes avoiding mine. Helen wanted to scold me again, but then followed him, her triumphant act gone, replaced by a dawning realization of what she had lost. As the door closed behind them, the silence of the house enveloped me. It was a painful moment, but also one of clarity. I had stood up for myself, chosen my dignity over a broken marriage. Now, it was time to rebuild my life on my own terms, in my own home. After the divorce was finalized, I found myself in a quiet, almost surreal calm. My house, once a battleground of tension and conflict, was now solely mine again. I spent the first few days just walking through the rooms, taking in the emptiness, the peace that had returned. It felt like waking up from a long, troubled dream. I started by returning the house to its former appearance, undoing the changes Helen had imposed. Each shift, each movement, felt like a step towards reclaiming my life. The walls were repainted back to the soothing blue I loved, the furniture rearranged to the way it used to be. With each change, a sense of normalcy and tranquility returned. My new routine was simple but fulfilling. Mornings were spent in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been neglected, and evenings were for reading books in the quiet of my living room. The house, with all its memories, began to feel like a home again. One afternoon, while pruning the roses, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, called out from over the fence. "Camilla, dear, I heard about your divorce. I'm so sorry." I smiled at her, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. It's been tough, but I'm getting there." She leaned in closer, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "You know, I hear things haven't been so peaceful at Helen's place either. The whole neighborhood knows about their squabbles. The police have been called there a few times already." I wasn't surprised. Helen, John, Lucy, her husband, and their kids all under one roof was a recipe for constant chaos. I can imagine. Too many conflicting personalities in one space. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. You're better off without that drama, dear. You always were too good for them. I laughed, the sound light and free. I'm starting to realize that now. Days turned into weeks, and I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost in the turmoil of my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The strokes of the brush on the canvas were like whispers of a newfound freedom. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of the ongoing drama at Helen's house. It was a stark reminder of the bullet I had dodged. Their house, once a symbol of familial unity, had become a pressure cooker of arguments and disagreements. In those moments, I felt a twinge of sadness for John, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. I had escaped that life, that endless cycle of unhappiness. I was free to live on my terms, to find happiness in the little things, my garden, my art, my peaceful home. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I realized that this was a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was the author, free to write my story, one day at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty was exciting, filled with possibilities. I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms, in my own way.
I'm Anna, and this story isn't just mine. It's about the life I shared with Michael, my husband, and how everything we built together slowly unraveled. We met in college, two dreamers with ambitions as high as the stars. Michael was the kind of guy who could light up a room with his laugh, simple yet charming, always with a kind word for everyone. We fell in love, graduated, and, as luck would have it, started our careers at the same company. Life was good, simple, and blissfully happy. Our evenings were the highlight of my days. We'd come home, cook together, and share stories about our work. Michael was a good listener, always interested in my day, my ideas. He was supportive, proud of our equal standing at work, our shared ambitions. Anna, you're amazing at what you do, he'd say with a smile. I love that we're in this together. But then, everything changed when Michael got promoted. It was a significant achievement, and initially, I was overjoyed. But with the promotion came a change I hadn't anticipated. Michael started to care more about appearances, about status. He wasn't the same man I'd fallen in love with. Slowly, his criticism began. First, it was subtle, a comment here or there. Why do we always eat the same meals? We can afford better now, he'd remark, pushing his plate away. I tried to adapt, to please him, but nothing seemed good enough. He began to critique my clothing, my shopping choices, even how I decorated our home. Why do you always buy the cheapest brands? We're not college students anymore, Anna, he'd say, his voice laced with annoyance. I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. The man I loved, who once found joy in our simple life, was now obsessed with wealth and status. One evening, after I returned from grocery shopping with more budget-friendly items, Michael's frustration boiled over. Anna, this isn't acceptable. You're still dressing and shopping like we're on a tight budget. You don't match my status, he said coldly, his words cutting through me like a knife. His words lingered in the air, marking the end of our simple, happy days. That was the moment I realized how much he had changed, how much our life had diverged from the path we once walked together. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey I never expected to take. As days turned into weeks, the strain in our relationship only deepened. Michael's constant critiques about how I didn't match his status weighed heavily on me. I missed the man he used to be, the one who found joy in our simple life together. But as his obsession with wealth and appearances grew, our connection continued to fade. In the midst of this growing distance, life threw us a curveball. I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a mix of emotions, joy, fear, and a glimmer of hope that this might bring us back together. Michael's reaction to the pregnancy was surprisingly warm. His face, which had been etched with dissatisfaction for so long, lit up when I told him. "Really? We're going to have a baby?" he exclaimed, his voice filled with an excitement I hadn't heard in ages. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of the old Michael. During my pregnancy, he was attentive and caring, often checking in on me and ensuring I was comfortable. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a brief return to the days when we were a team. When our son, David, was born, Michael's joy was palpable. Holding David for the first time, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect, Anna. We made this beautiful boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The early days with David were a blur of sleepless nights and new routines, but they were also filled with moments of tenderness and joy. Michael, despite his busy schedule, tried to be there for David's first milestones. Watching him with our son, I saw glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with. With David's arrival, our relationship found a temporary peace. The arguments and criticisms subsided, replaced by shared moments of wonder over our son. It was as if David's presence healed some of the fractures in our marriage. I cherished this period, hoping it would last, that maybe this was the turning point we needed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a brief respite, a calm before another storm. For now, though, I held on to the hope that our family could find its way back to the happiness we once knew. Life with a newborn was a whirlwind, and for a while, it seemed to bridge the gap between Michael and me. But as David grew and the novelty of new fatherhood faded for Michael, the old patterns began to resurface. Michael's work consumed him more than ever, and when he was home, his attention was more focused on showing off David than actually bonding with him. He would buy our son the most expensive toys and clothes, things a toddler would never appreciate. One evening, I found Michael online, browsing through a list of elite preschools. He didn't even look up as I entered the room. "Anna, I'm thinking of enrolling David in St. James Academy. It's the best in the city," he said, not asking but telling. I sat beside him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Michael, he's just 2. Do we really need to send him to such an expensive school?" He finally looked at me, his expression one of disbelief. "Of course, we do. He's my son. He deserves the best." "But he needs time to be a kid, Michael. Love and attention, not just the most expensive things," I argued, feeling a familiar frustration. Michael shook his head, dismissing my concerns. "You don't understand, Anna. It's about giving him opportunities I never had." This was our new normal. Conversations turned into debates, and debates into arguments. It felt like we were speaking different languages. I longed for the days when our dreams and values aligned. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it became physical. Michael often returned late from work, long after David and I had dinner. One night, when he came home at an ungodly hour, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "Michael, it's past midnight. You missed dinner again? David asked about you," I said, my voice laced with exhaustion. He shrugged off his coat, weary yet indifferent. "I'm the head of the department now, Anna. These late nights are just part of the job." "But what about us, Michael? What about your family?" I pleaded, hoping to reach some part of the man I married. He paused, his face a mix of fatigue and annoyance. "I'm doing all this for our family, Anna. You and David are living comfortably because of my hard work." I wanted to argue, to tell him that comfort wasn't just about money, but I was too tired. It was the same argument, and I knew I couldn't change his mind. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint clicks of his laptop from the other room, I realized that our little family was drifting apart. My husband, once my partner in every aspect of life, was now a stranger living under the same roof, connected only by a shared past and a son who deserved better than this growing void between his parents. It was during one of those long, silent evenings that I made a decision. I needed to go back to work, to find a piece of the woman I used to be before the distance with Michael grew too vast. The perfect opportunity came when a position opened up at my old company, the same place where Michael and I had started our journey together. Feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement, I decided to broach the subject with Michael. "Michael, I've been thinking of going back to work. There's an opening in my old department," I said, hoping for his support. His reaction was immediate and strong. "Go back to work? Why would you need to do that? I'm making more than enough for both of us," he replied, barely looking up from his laptop. I tried to explain. "It's not about the money, Michael. It's about me, about feeling like I'm contributing, being part of a team again." Michael finally looked at me, his expression one of disapproval. "You can contribute by taking care of David and the house. That's your team now." I couldn't hide my frustration. "But I need more than that. I want to use my skills, feel professional achievement again. Besides, it's good for David to see both his parents working." Michael stood up, his voice rising. "You going back to work, especially at my company, is not a good idea. What will people think? That I can't provide for my family?" I was taken aback by his attitude. "So this is about your image, your status?" He ignored my question and continued. "Look at yourself, Anna. You've changed. You've let yourself go since having David." His words were like a slap in the face. I felt my cheeks burning with a mix of anger and hurt. "What do you mean, I've let myself go?" "You know what I mean. You've gained weight. You hardly take care of yourself. It's not a good look, especially not for the wife of a department head," he said, his tone cold and detached. I was speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. The man who once loved me for who I was now stood there, criticizing my appearance, my worth. "And frankly," he added, his words cutting deeper, "I would be embarrassed to have you working at the company looking like this. I will be ashamed at work for such an ugly wife." I stood there, frozen, as he walked out of the room. His words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how far we had drifted apart. That night, I lay awake, Michael's words replaying over and over. It was clear now. The man I married, the man I loved, was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The days following Michael's harsh critique were some of the loneliest I had ever experienced. His words had cut deep, leaving me to question not just our relationship, but my self-worth. In the midst of this turmoil, an unexpected incident occurred that changed everything. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large, extravagant bouquet of flowers. Confused, I accepted the bouquet and the accompanying card, thinking maybe Michael was attempting an awkward apology. But as I opened the card, my heart sank. The words were like a punch to the gut. "To the most beautiful and perfect woman in the world, with the most charming youth and slender waist, which can be embraced with 2 hands." The words mocked me, a stark contrast to what Michael had said just days before. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation wash over me. This wasn't for me. It couldn't be. It was then I noticed the mistake in the address. The bouquet was meant for someone else. As I stood there trying to process this, my phone rang. It was Michael's new secretary, a young girl who had just started working for him. Michael had mentioned her once, laughing about how she was still studying and often mixed things up. "Mrs. Smith, I'm so sorry. I think I've made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice anxious. "What mistake?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "The flowers. They were meant for someone else." "I'm so sorry. I sent them to the wrong address," she admitted, sounding flustered. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Who were they meant for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The secretary hesitated. I don't know her name. I'm just asked to send flowers and gifts sometimes. Please don't tell Mr. Smith I called." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room, the unfaithful bouquet mocking me from the table. The realization of Michael's betrayal hit me hard. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Without a second thought, I packed a bag for myself and David. I grabbed some of his favorite toys, his clothes, and the essentials. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer, surrounded by the life I thought we had, which now felt like a lie. I left a note for Michael on the kitchen counter. I didn't wait for him to come home to offer excuses or explanations. I took David, who was confused but excited for an impromptu visit to Auntie's house, and left. Driving to my sister's place, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartache. The life I had known was crumbling, but I knew I needed to get away, to find some space to think and to protect David from the fallout. That evening, as I sat in my sister's living room, lost in thought, Michael showed up unexpectedly. He looked frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed self. "Anna, why did you leave? Why did you take David?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and anger. I confronted him directly. "Why? Maybe because of the bouquet sent to your mistress, mistakenly delivered to your wife," I said, my voice steady but filled with hurt. Michael's face fell. That was a misunderstanding. The secretary, she made a mistake. I swear, there's nothing going on." I looked at him, trying to find a hint of the truth in his eyes, but all I saw was desperation. "A mistake? Is that your best explanation?" Before he could respond, I pulled out a packet of photos and laid them on the table. "Then how do you explain these, Michael?" His eyes widened as he looked at the photos of him with a young woman, clearly more than just colleagues. Where did you get these?" he stammered. "I hired a private detective. He's been very thorough. Did you know she's the wife of your business partner?" I asked, watching as the color drained from his face. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "You can't let these get out. It'll ruin everything," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a bitter laugh escape me. "Ruin everything? What about us, Michael? What about our family?" He reached out, but I pulled away. "Anna, please, I'm begging you, forgive me. I can fix this." But it was too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. "Forgive you after you've lied and cheated? I can't, Michael, I won't. I'm filing for divorce, and these photos, they'll ensure I get what David and I deserve." Michael looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as the reality of the situation hit him. "Anna, please." But I had made up my mind. "No, Michael, you've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As he left, I knew that this was the end of our marriage. The evidence in my hands was more than just proof of his infidelity. It was the key to a new beginning for me and David. The road ahead would be hard, but I was determined to rebuild our lives, free from lies and betrayal. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings and tough decisions. I had initiated the divorce proceedings, armed with the evidence of Michael's infidelity. Despite the turmoil, there was a sense of determination within me. I was fighting not just for my own dignity, but for a better future for David. One afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss the details of the divorce. "We have a strong case, Anna. The evidence you provided is more than enough to ensure a favorable outcome for you and David," she said, her voice confident. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I just want this to be over. I want to ensure that David is taken care of." My lawyer assured me, "We'll make sure of that. You'll have custody, and with Michael's position, child support won't be an issue." As the days passed, the reality of my new life began to set in. I was going to be a single mother, a role I never anticipated. But I also felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was making decisions, standing up for myself and my son. The final hearing was a tense affair. Michael and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, the air thick with unspoken words. When the judge granted the divorce, citing Michael's infidelity, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was officially free from a marriage that had become a source of pain and betrayal. Outside the courtroom, Mikhail approached me. "Anna, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this," he said, his voice laced with defeat. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger. "It didn't have to be this way, Michael, but you made your choices." He nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I just hope one day you can forgive me, for David's sake." I took a deep breath. "I'll always do what's best for David, but as for us, there's nothing left to say." Walking away from the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure. The divorce was not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of a new chapter. I had stood up for myself, fought for what was right, and in the end, I had come out stronger. The finalization of the divorce marked the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a time of rebuilding, not just for me, but for David as well. We had both been through so much, and now it was time to look forward to a future that was ours to shape. One sunny afternoon, as David played in my sister's backyard, I sat with her on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. "You know, I never thought I'd be here, starting over like this," I said, watching David chase butterflies. My sister, always my rock, smiled at me. "But you're not just starting over, Anna. You're starting fresh. There's a difference. You're stronger now, more aware of what you want and don't want." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yeah, I guess you're right. It's all so overwhelming at times." She reached over, squeezing my hand. "It's going to be okay. You've got this, and you've got us, always." I smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the days turned into weeks, I began to find my footing again. I returned to work, where I was greeted with warmth and understanding. It felt good to be back, to be productive and to engage with colleagues who respected and valued me. David, too, was adjusting. He missed his father, but we made sure he had regular visits. I wanted to ensure that, despite everything, he had a relationship with Michael. After all, whatever had happened between Michael and me, he was still David's dad. One evening, as I tucked David into bed, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft. I kissed his forehead, feeling a surge of love for my little boy. "Yes, David, I am. And I want you to always be happy too." He smiled, a sleepy, content smile. "I am, Mommy. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything," I whispered, turning off his light. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I had been on. I thought about the future, uncertain but promising. I had dreams to chase, a career to build, and a beautiful son to raise. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I was ready to face it head on. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just a new beginning. It was a chance to write my own story, on my own terms. And with that thought, I welcomed the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, ready to embrace them with an open heart and a newfound strength.